If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1. After losing everything, I decided to become an author. In his dream, Haruto felt a sharp pain in his head, as if someone had struck him several times with an iron rod. A flood of memories surged up, some belonging to him, others clearly not. They tangled together and began to merge, and for a brief moment, he felt as though he was about to turn into someone else entirely. In the end, however, Haruto's own will remained dominant. The memories that did not belong to him gradually transformed into something like fragmented video clips, sinking deep into his mind. They became vague and distant, like an adult's recollection of early childhood. Even if you tried hard to remember, you might not be able to clearly recall them. Everyone has experienced dreaming about the past at least once. Haruto was now in that very state. In his dream, he was someone else. And that someone seemed to be a girl. She lay in her bedroom at home, eating potato chips and sipping cola, her eyes fixed unblinkingly on the computer sitting on her desk. On the screen played scenes from an anime. Blue Spring Ride. Haruto had never watched this series before, yet the moment he slipped into the girl's perspective, the title surfaced in his mind without hesitation. And so, in this strange dreamlike state, he calmly watched the romance anime through the eyes of the girl. After all, in Japan, light novels, anime, manga, and games formed a massive cultural industry. Otaku culture was deeply ingrained in society, especially among middle and high school students, and its influence extended worldwide. Haruto was no exception. Although the situation was bizarre, he found himself enjoying it. His sense of immersion came almost entirely from the girl herself. In the dream, the girl watched Blue Spring Ride episode by episode. She was genuinely happy. She did not have to work. She did not have to go to school. There was no meaningless socializing. Her parents had passed away early, leaving behind an enormous inheritance placed in a trust fund. The portion she could freely use amounted to several million yen in annual returns. There was virtually no chance of her ever becoming poor. All she needed to do was enjoy her hobbies. She lived as a carefree shut-in, occasionally meeting friends to attend conventions as a cosplayer, collecting figures, indulging in whatever she liked. Every year's trust income was spent entirely on her passions. Because of that, Haruto, who was experiencing everything through her perspective, felt just as relaxed and content as he followed along with her binge-watching. So this was the inner world of a true ultimate otaku. She really was happy. Halfway through the anime, the girl ordered delivery. It was sweet glutinous rice dumplings with a spicy sesame filling, dipped in chili oil and houtunia leaves. The flavor was indescribable for Haruto, whose immersion was far too strong, yet she ate with obvious delight. Sweet dumpling fans, savory dumpling fans, they were all heretics in her eyes. Sweet, salty, and spicy combined was the only true answer. Unfortunately, there was no coriander at home today, so this order could only score a 90 out of 100. Haruto did his best to forget the bizarre taste that lingered in his senses. He refocused his attention on the anime playing on the computer screen in front of him. The artwork was beautiful, and the story overflowed with youthful emotion. The heroine, Futaba, reunited in high school with Kao, the boy she had liked back in middle school but lost contact with due to family circumstances. Thus began a tender, bittersweet coming-of-age romance. It was a shoujo anime, but even as a perfectly normal teenage boy, Haruto found his own soft-hearted side stirred from time to time. In his daily life, he had watched and read plenty of romance stories, and as the episodes went on, his consciousness became fully absorbed. The story really was good. Two people who once shared mutual feelings met again 3 years later. Misunderstandings, longing, and growth intertwined beautifully. Without realizing it, the anime had reached episode 6. Futaba fell into confusion when she discovered that both she and her close friend had feelings for Kao. Should she protect their friendship and sacrifice her own emotions, supporting her friend as she confessed to the boy Futaba had secretly liked for years? Or should she face her feelings honestly, tell her friend the truth, and compete fairly for Kao, even if it meant risking their friendship? Unable to make a choice, Futaba decided to leave the answer to Kao himself. On their way home together, just as the subway train was about to depart, she suddenly claimed she had forgotten something at school. She stepped back a few paces and exited the train at the last moment. The doors began to close. The boy and girl stood barely a meter apart, staring at each other through the glass. Would he get off the train and go back with her to retrieve what she had forgotten? Or would he find it troublesome, go home alone, and let Futaba return to school by herself? If Kao did not get off the train with me, I will stop liking him. If he does get off, then I will keep loving him. Futaba's inner monologue echoed as the background music swelled. The subway doors slowly slid shut. Kao had no idea that her sudden decision to step off the train carried such meaning. His choice in the next second would decide whether Futaba continued to hold on to her unrequited love. "Ah, I cannot watch this," the girl muttered. "If Kao finds it annoying and does not get off the train, I will be miserable all night and never fall asleep. To be safe, I will sleep now and finish it tomorrow. Better to eliminate any chance of losing sleep over this." With a snap, she shut off the computer. Haruto's consciousness, still immersed in her perspective, was left in utter chaos. "No, wait. Do not stop here. Watch one more episode. Are you even human? How can you sleep with the story cutting off right here?" He cursed furiously in his subconscious, overwhelmed by the unbearable frustration of being cut off at such a critical moment. It was downright cruel. The screen went dark. Haruto jolted awake in bed, drenched in sweat. "What was that?" His voice was hoarse with exhaustion. The dream from the night before had felt far too real. A sudden realization dawned on him. Earth. A girl. It was as if the soul of a girl from another world had entered his body, but the fusion had failed. No, not entirely failed. Her will had already faded away, leaving behind only fragments of memory sealed deep within his mind. Occasionally, when he dreamed, he could see pieces of her life in that other world. As for that anime called Blue Spring Ride, Haruto now ground his teeth in frustration. She had gone to sleep halfway through, forcing him to stop at the worst possible moment. However, the lingering desire to continue watching through her memories was quickly extinguished by reality. In the dream, because he had been immersed in her perspective, he had felt her peace of mind. His real-world worries had temporarily faded away. But once awake, the immense pressure he had been facing over the past month came crashing back. Haruto. 16 years old. Height 176 centimeters. Weight 63 kilograms. Fairly handsome. A second-year student at a high school in Minamoto. His mother had died from illness 10 years ago. 1 month ago, his father's small company collapsed due to poor management during an economic downturn. Burdened with massive debt, unable to withstand the blow, his father took his own life together with his mistress. The kind of tragedy you usually only saw in newspapers had happened to his family. At first, Haruto had been stunned and heartbroken. But after that passed, the real world beyond school pressed down on him with brutal clarity. Even if he sold the apartment he currently lived in, it would not be enough to repay the enormous debts his father had left behind. Under these circumstances, there was no reason for Haruto to inherit his father's estate, which was nothing but negative assets. In 2 or 3 months, once the foreclosure process was complete, he would be forced to leave his home. He had no relatives on either side to rely on. Most of those who could be called relatives were essentially creditors now. Since he had not agreed to take on his father's debts, he had already burned whatever bridges remained. The reality before him was simple and merciless. Survival. A 16-year-old high school student facing homelessness within 3 months, with no money to his name. His options were limited. Dropping out and entering the workforce was one possibility. Continuing his education was another, though hardly easy. University tuition in Japan was not cheap. Prestigious fields like medicine or law could cost millions of yen over 4 years, demanding heavy investment for future returns. Those paths were not realistic for most people. For ordinary majors, however, as long as he could get in, student loans and scholarships were often available. Haruto chose to continue his education. When the time came to advance after his 3rd year, tuition issues could be handled through financial aid, regardless of the amount. So the path forward was not cut off, just extremely difficult. Should he drop out and enter society? Or grit his teeth and continue studying? It was a decision he had to make soon. It was already late January, and the new semester would begin in just over a week. His father's assets had been frozen. Aside from temporarily staying in this apartment until it was auctioned off, Haruto had access to only one thing. 50k yen in savings from his old allowance. If none of this had happened, he had planned to use that money during winter break to go on dates with his ex-girlfriend, a classmate and student council president named Rin, to deepen their relationship. But now, after 2 months of dating, Rin had learned about his family's bankruptcy a month ago. The moment Haruto fell from a comfortable middle-class background into poverty, she broke up with him without hesitation. Before, he could shower her with gifts thanks to his father's money. Now he might have needed help himself. Of course she chose to leave. He understood her choice, even if it still hurt. There were many cultural differences between worlds, but one thing was exactly the same. Society was cruel. Even high school girls already paid close attention to family background when choosing a boyfriend. Dating did not necessarily mean marriage, but without money, even romance was off the table. After all, romance itself was built on spending money. No matter what, I have to endure the next year and a half of high school first, Haruto thought as he lay in bed. Dropping out now, without even a high school diploma, would make life nearly impossible here. I have already spent over 10 years studying, and I am more than halfway through. Leaving without graduating would be too much to accept. As for whether he would go on to university afterward, he decided to take it one step at a time. But if I choose this path, I need to solve the problem of living expenses for the next year and a half. Food, rent after I am kicked out of this place. 50k yen is nowhere near enough. Haruto's mental resilience was fairly strong. Otherwise, he could not have recovered within a month from his father's death, family bankruptcy, imminent eviction, and breakup. Even the absurd experience of merging with the soul of a girl from another world barely fazed him. After enough blows, people stopped panicking and learned to adjust quickly. There has to be some way to earn money while still attending high school. Despite his calm mindset, he could not think of a solution with his limited experience. He sat up on his bed and looked out the window from the 21st floor, taking in the cityscape below. Sigh. Too bad I will not be able to see this view in a few months. Feeling restless, he lay back down and turned his gaze toward the cabinet filled with anime discs, serialized light novels, and manga volumes. His eyes suddenly sharpened. He fell silent for a long moment, then began speaking to himself again. I cannot draw manga. I cannot make games. I cannot write anime scripts. But I can write novels. I am pretty good at Japanese. And that anime I saw last night, Blue Spring Ride, was really good. Way more interesting than most of the romance light novels I have been buying. There are several light novel publishers in Minamoto, right? If I rewrite it as a light novel and submit it, and if it gets picked up for serialization, the manuscript fees should not be bad. A spark lit up in the boy's eyes. He knew very well that within Japan's massive otaku industry, whether anime, games, manga, or novels, it was notorious as a graveyard for newcomers. Competition was brutal to the point of absurdity, enough to scare most people away. But no one competed that fiercely for security guard or restroom attendant positions. The reason this industry was so cutthroat was simple. If you succeeded, the rewards were enormous, far exceeding most other fields. From the perspective of a long-time otaku who had consumed countless anime, novels, and games, Haruto felt that the work he had seen through the girl's memories was genuinely special. It was far more engaging than many works already being serialized. The original version had survived the ruthless manga market of that other world and gone on to be adapted into anime, novels, and even films. Its quality was undeniable. Different worlds meant different tastes. What was honey to one might be poison to another. Still, Haruto trusted his own judgment as a veteran fan. If it had drawn him in, there should be a sizable audience with similar tastes. There was no reason his adaptation into a Japanese light novel would have zero chance. He did not need it to become a massive hit. Earning enough manuscript fees to cover living expenses and rent during high school would be enough. Most importantly, writing a novel would not interfere with attending classes or earning credits toward graduation. Once school started, he could write during foreign language classes he did not understand anyway, or during math and physics lectures. No other money-making idea he could think of offered that kind of advantage. I really am a genius. With that thought, Haruto sat up and looked at the stationery and pen on his desk. However, the biggest problem remained. He could only passively watch the girl's memories through dreams. He had seen only half of Blue Spring Ride before it was abruptly cut off. How long would that interruption last? Would the dream continue tonight? Or would he never see the rest? He let out a cold laugh. Why was he worrying about that now? The urgent issue was not whether the story would end up unfinished because he could not access the latter half of the memories. That was too far in the future. He had not even learned how to walk yet. Why worry about running? That was a problem for readers after the novel was actually published and serialized. As a prospective author, what he needed to think about was this. If he wrote and submitted the portion of the story he currently knew, how would he pass the editor's review at a light novel publisher? If it did not get accepted, all of this was meaningless speculation. Chapter 2, Writing is Harder Than It Looked. Her name was Shiori. Shiori Takahashi. As Haruto sat at his desk, scribbling furiously across page after page, the name of the girl whose lingering soul memories slept deep inside his mind suddenly resurfaced. It was like remembering the name of a kindergarten friend you had not thought about in years. A strange excitement rose in his chest, sharp and inexplicable, but it faded almost immediately. What remained was only frustration. A lot of ordinary people thought writing novels was easy. They imagined you just put pen to paper and somehow cranked out 10,000 words a day. But think about it. 10,000 words was roughly the equivalent of writing a dozen full-length essay assignments. Plenty of students ran out of things to say halfway through an 800-word composition exam. If you had not trained for it, 10,000 words was just torture. That was exactly where Haruto was right now. He had assumed that turning the plot of Blue Spring Ride, as he remembered it from the anime, into prose would be simple. In reality, it was anything but. Characters, setting, expressions, pacing, tiny physical details, the emotional beats between lines, all of it was completely different from the kind of writing he did for school. You could say he had eaten pork plenty of times, but he had never raised a pig himself. Haruto had never written a light novel before, but he had read enough to develop a discerning eye. His skills as a critic were far ahead of his skills as a creator. After 2 hours of work, he looked back at what he had written. What even was this? It was so awkward he wanted to evaporate on the spot. So, it really is not that easy, he muttered. He had expected this outcome, to be fair. He trusted his Japanese grades, but being good at Japanese did not automatically mean you could write smooth, vivid narrative prose. And even if he was adapting the story from the anime in his head, that did not guarantee his version would feel as good as the original. He had a perfect example for this. In the world Shiori Takahashi came from, there was an anime called 5 cm per second. After it became famous, it received 2 different official novel adaptations. One was written by the original creator, Makoto Shinkai, in his own style. The other was written by a professional novelist adapting the anime into prose. They followed the same core plot, yet the reading experience was completely different. Haruto exhaled slowly and stared at the messy pile of words on his desk. Too much of it was pointless description. He wrote, then crossed out, then rewrote, and the fatigue started to pile up. By the time he finally could not hold out any longer and went to bed, he had managed only about 2,000 words, handwritten, based on the scenes he remembered. It was painfully slow. That night, in his sleep, Haruto became the girl again. Shiori Takahashi. This time, the dream did not pick up where it had left off with the subway scene. Instead, she sat at her desk playing an online shooter, controlling female characters with flashy skins and tearing through zombies like it was the most satisfying thing in the world. Hey, how about you watch the rest of Blue Spring Ride instead of playing games, Haruto complained silently, practically screaming inside his own head. What are you doing, grinding a shooter right now? Of course, it was useless. Shiori Takahashi, or rather the memory of her, could not hear him. These were not conversations. They were fragments. When morning came, Haruto woke up with a brain full of gunfire and game menus. For 8 straight hours, the girl had rotated through game after game on accounts that were fully maxed out, like someone who had unlimited time, unlimited money, and absolutely no guilt about it. Not even a second of Blue Spring Ride's continuation. Still, watching someone else play was oddly entertaining, and because his immersion was so strong, her satisfaction carried over into him. In the end, the experience felt almost like he had played himself, and it left him strangely fulfilled. He stretched, then turned toward his desk again. All right. Time to work, he told himself. Today I have to get at least the early chapters done. He wrote like his life depended on it. His learning speed was fast. The clumsy, stiff prose from the night before began to smooth out. When he got stuck and could not figure out how to describe a scene, he simply grabbed a light novel from his shelf and studied how other writers handled similar moments. Little by little, the stack of pages grew. His version of Blue Spring Ride, reimagined as a light novel, started to take shape in a way that felt real. Of course, it was still a first draft. After he finished, he would need to check for mistakes, polish the sentences, and revise everything again and again. 3 days later, Haruto had more or less converted everything he remembered, up through episode 5.9, into a manuscript he could accept as good enough. Why 5.9? Because he had not actually finished episode 6. The girl had shut the computer off right at the climax and gone to sleep, leaving him stranded there. And during those 3 days, he only slipped into Shiori's memories once more, last night, when she went to a convention in cosplay. As for the other 2 nights, he slept normally. Nothing happened at all. That made one thing clear. At least for now, Haruto could not control when these dream memories would appear. He could only wait and hope the situation changed later. When he thought back to the convention dream, to be honest, it was hard to describe. It was a sensation he had never experienced in his entire life. In those memories, he had become a cute girl in black stockings, wearing a gothic outfit, soaking in the awe of strangers, posing for photos, taking pictures with people, and hugging clothes with her gorgeous friends, clinging to each other like best friends do, laughing and wandering the venue together. Smack! Haruto slapped himself. What is wrong with you? He snapped at his reflection in the mirror. Why are you jealous of that life? You are a guy. The fact that part of him had thought, that actually looks kind of fun, terrified him. Was he some kind of weirdo? He spent a little extra time forcing his thoughts back into order. There were 5 days left until school started. Once the semester began, he would not have this kind of free time. What he needed to do in those remaining 5 days was submit his light novel manuscript. Japan was one of the most powerful nations on the planet, with a population of over 100 million and a comfortable standard of living for a huge portion of its citizens. Once a society moved beyond pure survival, just like in any developed country, sports, entertainment, and cultural industries exploded. And among them, the otaku sphere, built around games, manga, novels, and anime, had become a major pillar of the national economy over the past few decades. Japanese works were beloved at home and exported worldwide. With such high acceptance of otaku culture, creators naturally gained status. Famous novelists, mangaka, and animation staff enjoyed enormous prestige, and their incomes were just as enormous. The logic was simple. The Japan from Shiori's memories also had an extremely developed otaku industry, and it had produced a whole class of high-earning creators with a market of only around 100 million people. Japan's market was massive and deeply rooted. Successful creators here could earn far more. Of course, signing with a top-tier publisher was still a distant fantasy for Haruto. Those giant serialization magazines that sold hundreds of thousands, even millions of copies per issue were not going to gamble on some unknown kid's manuscript. No matter how good your opening hook was, being a newcomer meant risk. Hiatuses, abandoned endings, authors vanishing without a word, editors desperately chasing deadlines, this kind of thing happened all the time in the light novel world. Even famous writers pulled that nonsense, so for a complete rookie? The industry giants had no reason to take that chance. So Haruto did not foolishly submit his few days of work to the biggest publishers. His real targets were 5 large local light novel publishers headquartered in the prefectural capital. Competition in the light novel world was fierce. Only a handful of top publishers could dominate nationally and sell well in every region. Most mid-sized and smaller publishers, based outside the biggest centers, mainly thrived within their own prefectures or neighboring areas. That was normal. Building sales networks, distribution chains, and nationwide marketing was brutally difficult. Even having strong influence locally meant years of fighting competitors, negotiating bookstores, and investing in promotion. These prefecture-based publishers could not match the reach of the giants, but within their own territory, their sales were still impressive. Just counting local magazine circulation, they could even rival what the national giants sold in this region. The quality of serialized works might not be as high, but local companies poured everything into their own ground. Their bookstore partnerships, advertising, and discount campaigns were often stronger in their home area than what the big publishers could manage while spreading resources nationwide. If you could not beat them in pure prestige, then you fought with practical advantages. Haruto took his handwritten manuscript to a print shop and made 7 or 8 copies. Then he pulled out his student transit pass and stepped out through the gate of his apartment complex. Chapter 3, First Submission Day and a Suspiciously Serious Girl in the Elevator. Skycrest Library, Blue Sky Publishing, Fantasy Literature, Sakura Archive, and Crimson Maple Literature. Those were the names of the 5 major light novel serialization publishers headquartered in the main city. Conveniently, all 5 companies had their main offices clustered in the northern CBD district of the city, so Haruto did not need to crisscross Minamijo all day. After about an hour on the bus, his first stop was the headquarters of Crimson Maple Literature. The 200-meter office tower in front of him obviously did not belong entirely to Crimson Maple. Their offices occupied only floors 19 through 21. Before coming, Haruto had thoroughly researched all 5 publishers through every channel he could find. After registering at the front desk, he stepped into the elevator with a hint of nervousness. It was around 10 in the morning, so the building was not especially crowded. He was the only one inside the elevator. He pressed the button for the 20th floor, and just as the doors were about to close, a pair of slender, pale hands reached in and stopped them. The doors slid back open. A girl wearing a baseball cap and a face mask stepped inside, holding a semi-transparent plastic document folder filled with papers, which she hugged to her chest. She moved to stand a short distance away from Haruto. She looked to be around 160 centimeters tall, with long black hair reaching her waist. She wore a light red athletic jacket on top and loose beige pants below. With the cap and mask covering her face, it was hard to see her features, but judging from her eyes, her smooth fair skin, and the outline of her face, he could tell she was probably quite pretty. She pressed the button for the 19th floor. Haruto was not deliberately staring. He was just unconsciously taking in details. But as his gaze passed over the folder she was holding, he caught sight of something inside. On the first page, written in colorful marker, were several large characters. Yesterday's Starlight. Behind it was a thick stack of printed manuscript pages. Combined with the fact that she had pressed the 19th floor button, a thought surfaced in his mind. Ah! She is probably here to submit a manuscript too. Just like me. Yesterday's Starlight. What kind of story is it? Various thoughts flickered through his head. Perhaps his gaze lingered a bit too long on the folder, because the girl suddenly shifted her stance, her guard rising. As the elevator ascended, the atmosphere inside grew awkward. Sorry, Haruto said quickly, trying to ease the tension. I just wanted to let you know that if you are here to submit to Crimson Maple, you should go to the 20th floor. The 19th floor is for operations and senior editors. New submissions are handled on the 20th. As soon as he spoke, the girl's wariness visibly eased. Thank you, she said after a brief pause. She reached out and turned off the illuminated 19th floor button. Her voice was clear, her tone slightly cool, but after she responded, the awkwardness in the elevator faded considerably. You are welcome, Haruto replied with a polite smile. After that, neither of them spoke again. The 20th floor arrived quickly. They exited the elevator one after the other and walked down the corridor, which was lined from start to finish with posters. Every single one was an illustration from Crimson Maple Literature's most celebrated light novels over the years. These were the publisher's flagship works. Any one of them had sold hundreds of thousands, some even over 1 million copies in total volume sales. Haruto owned full sets of quite a few of them. At the end of the corridor, they finally reached Crimson Maple's main office hall. The moment he stepped inside, he was struck by how lively it was. This floor was dedicated specifically to new submissions, and in the light novel world, what was the most common thing? Newcomers. Even on a cold early February day, there were 7 or 8 people waiting in the reception area. In the central office space, stacks of manuscripts mailed in from all over the country or delivered in person were being carefully reviewed by editors. You two are here to submit manuscripts, right? A receptionist dressed in a professional office skirt, approached them with a practiced smile. She had worked here for years, and she could tell their purpose at a glance. Yes. That is right. They spoke almost at the same time. The girl in the red athletic jacket glanced at Haruto again. So he was a fellow submitter. Please come this way, the receptionist said. There are 7 people ahead of you, but do not worry. Within 20 minutes, an on-site editor will meet with you. 20 minutes? The masked girl asked to confirm. Yes, 20 minutes, the receptionist replied, then led them to the waiting area and left. 20 minutes, 7 people, the girl murmured, looking toward the room across from the waiting area. Through the frosted glass, she could make out only a single editor inside. That alone revealed how brutal this industry was. Crimson Maple published dozens of magazines across various genres, but each magazine only had a dozen or so serialization slots. Most of the time, new slots only opened up when existing series ended. And those few precious slots were competed over by countless young men and women across the prefecture, all influenced by anime and light novels, all betting their future careers on becoming light novel authors. Most submissions were nothing more than cannon fodder. Trash. Experienced editors needed only a minute or two to skim a few thousand words before deciding a manuscript's fate. The masked girl tightened her grip on the transparent folder. As for Haruto, he casually looked around from his seat and even asked the receptionist to pour him a cup of hot coffee. There was nothing to be nervous about. If a creator's life work, poured out with blood and sweat, was rejected within a minute, that would be devastating. But strictly speaking, Haruto was not the true creator of Blue Spring Ride. Even if it was rejected, it would not hurt too much. If Crimson Maple did not want it, he would simply try the other 4 publishers. Haruto. The receptionist gestured for him to enter the meeting room. It had not even been 20 minutes. After just 15, following 7 people who walked out with dejected expressions, it was finally his turn. "Oh, it is my turn," Haruto said, his spirits lifting. He grabbed the copied manuscript of Blue Spring Ride, pushed open the door, and stepped inside. Chapter 4, A high school boy submits a shoujo romance. As Haruto stepped inside, he found a woman who looked to be in her mid to late 20s sitting across the desk. She wore black-framed glasses. Her face was oval and refined, her eyebrows long and elegant, her nose straight, and her features delicate. With long hair draped over her shoulders, she was unmistakably beautiful. She was Yukino Aoyama, the editor assigned today to review on-site submissions for Crimson Maple literature. At the moment, a faint trace of fatigue showed on her face. That was only natural. Every day, anywhere from several dozen to over 100 people came here to submit manuscripts in person. Reviewing new works non-stop was exhausting for anyone. Haruto walked in with open curiosity, studying Yukino, while Yukino was also quietly observing him. A student. She sighed inwardly. With Haruto's youthful features, there was no way to mistake him for a working adult. Even the least perceptive person would recognize him as a teenager. Student authors were not unheard of in the Japanese light novel world, but students had to juggle schoolwork, and most lacked life experience. As a result, 99% of what they wrote was hard to describe kindly. At best, it was underdeveloped. At worst, it was pure self-indulgence, completely disconnected from market expectations. The prose wandered, the structure was loose, and the plot went wherever the author's mood took it. Very few student-written works ever made it into serialization. Most authors who secured spots in publisher magazines were professionals who had devoted years to the craft. They were adults, people with the time and mental space to refine plots and chase inspiration. Of course, there were rare geniuses who broke all the rules. "Hello. You are Haruto, correct? I am Yukino Aoyama, the editor in charge here at Crimson Maple," she said with a polite smile, glancing at the information sheet he had filled out. "Hello, Aoyama-san," Haruto replied as he took his seat. Although he was just a student, his father had often brought him along to gatherings with business associates when he was alive. He was not nearly as socially awkward as many boys his age. "You are a second-year high school student, right?" Yukino asked. "That is correct." She paused, then did not pursue the topic further. Once his name and identity were confirmed, there was no need to dig deeper. If the manuscript itself did not pass, any additional information would be a waste of time. "I see from your submission form that the title of your novel is Blue Spring Ride. And the genre is shoujo romance," Yukino said, her tone turning slightly strange. Normally, a high school boy's work would fall into action, supernatural battles, or male-oriented romance. Shoujo romance, by definition, meant a female protagonist. Could a high school boy really depict a girl's thoughts and feelings accurately? Could he capture the subtle emotional world unique to young women? After all, the internal worlds of boys and girls were vastly different. In her 2 years as an editor, Yukino had seen female authors succeed with shounen-targeted works. She had never seen a male author break out with a shoujo romance. "Yes. It is a shoujo romance," Haruto said firmly. "I have a lot of confidence in Blue Spring Ride." He deliberately put on a confident smile and slid the manuscript folder across the desk with both hands, projecting conviction at the very least. It was not that he felt no anxiety. A story that succeeded in a parallel world was not guaranteed to resonate here. But as a creator, he could not show even a hint of hesitation. If the author lacked confidence in their own work, no one else would believe in it either. Yukino did not waste time. She opened the folder, took out the manuscript, and began reading. I once had a time in my life that can never be erased. The opening of Blue Spring Ride was simple. In middle school, the heroine, Futaba, and the male lead, Kao, took shelter from a sudden rainstorm under the same eaves. That brief encounter sparked mutual affection between them. Later, for various reasons, Kao was forced to transfer schools. Before leaving, he invited Futaba to meet him one last time at a summer festival. However, because Futaba had grown too close to Kao, their classmates mocked her, spreading rumors about their relationship. Panicking, Futaba blurted out words she did not mean. "I hate all boys." Those words pierced Kao's heart. On the night of the festival, at 7 o'clock, the one who had extended the invitation never showed up. The next day, he transferred schools and disappeared from her life. A single act of tsundere pride ruined everything. That was how the story between Futaba and Kao began. In Haruto's novel adaptation, he devoted considerable space to portraying Futaba's awkwardness, her pride, and her inability to be honest during middle school. The flow of the story drew Yukino in almost immediately. She had expected an ordinary attempt at shoujo romance from a teenage boy, but as she read on, her impression changed. This clumsy, hazy feeling was almost shocking. Even though I was constantly searching for the right answer, back then, I truly liked him. Even now, he still occupies a corner of my heart. I want so badly to return to that time. The heroine's inner monologue laid bare her conflicted emotions, her regret over feelings she never voiced. As an opening for a youth romance novel, it was undeniably compelling. The story then shifted to Futaba's high school years, 3 years later. To avoid being isolated by other girls again for being cute and gentle, Futaba deliberately adopted a rough, unrefined persona in high school. She hid her softness, ate loudly, spoke bluntly, and made sure boys saw her as unladylike. In exchange, the girls around her felt at ease. Nearly 40% of the opening chapters were devoted to exploring Futaba's inner world. This was the fundamental difference between shoujo and shounen romance. In most male-oriented romance novels, especially harem stories, the focus was on the various female characters. The male protagonist often served as little more than a vessel for reader projection. Swap out his personality, replace him entirely, or even insert the reader in his place, and the story would still function. Shoujo romance was different. The heroine was the core of the story. She was irreplaceable. The appeal lay in her emotional journey, from confusion to affection to obsession and onward into heartbreak, sweetness, or a painful road that eventually led to happiness. This kind of emotional portrayal was notoriously difficult for male authors. It was like palace intrigue dramas. Most of the time, only women could convincingly write stories centered on women competing for affection. Men simply lacked the lived experience to do it justice. And yet, Yukino glanced up at the boy sitting across from her. The way this manuscript depicted a girl's unspoken longing was astonishingly delicate. It was more engaging than the work of many female writers. The heroine, Futaba, was genuinely interesting. Would she and the boy she loved 3 years ago meet again? Soon, the story answered that question. On her first day of high school, Futaba encountered Kao once more. Drawn to him against her will, she found herself searching for him in the school halls, approaching him, speaking again beneath the same eaves where they once sheltered from the rain. "Even though your height and voice have changed, the person standing in front of me is still the first boy I ever loved." Her heart began to race. Yukino continued reading. "You have always seemed to hate boys," Kao said lightly, smiling as they stood beneath the familiar shelter. "Yes. I have hated them for a long time," Futaba replied. She hugged her school bag tightly, fingers clenched, forcing her voice to stay steady. "But you are the exception." The boy raised a hand, covering his eyes. "Oh. I see. I feel the same. I liked you back then too," Kao said gently. "Just like those happiest moments back then, please let time turn back." Futaba prayed silently. "That is impossible now. For both of us," Kao said calmly, smiling as he turned and walked away. Tears welled in Futaba's eyes as she watched his retreating figure. He was telling me to forget. And yet, while saying something so cold, his expression was filled with loneliness. That night at the festival 3 years ago, I waited for him the entire evening, but he never came. I thought that once summer ended, I would explain everything. I believed there would always be another chance. We can never return to that time. That was where the first chapter ended. Yukino's hand trembled slightly. Normally, she would skim a chapter like this in 2 or 3 minutes. Editors were trained to read at extreme speed without sacrificing judgment. This time was different. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 11 minutes. She had spent 11 full minutes reading, completely immersed in Futaba's heart, sharing her affection for Kao and her regret over those unspoken words 3 years ago. When the chapter ended on the thought, there will be many more chances, a quiet sadness crept into her chest. In real life, how many chances were there really? Once something was missed, it was gone forever. Haruto had submitted the first 3 chapters. He had researched the 5 major publishers in the prefecture, and their serialized light novels typically ran 10 to 20,000 words per issue. He had carefully kept his chapter lengths within that range. He sat in silence as Yukino read. 10 minutes passed without a word. Despite his efforts to stay calm, anxiety began to creep in. Was it good? Or was it bad? Chapter 5, A Promising Manuscript and an Unexpected Schoolmate. Haruto finally saw Yukino finish reading the first chapter. He thought she would say something right away. Instead, she picked up the manuscript for the second chapter and continued reading without saying a word. At that moment, Haruto slowly realized something. The tension in his chest began to ease. If the story were boring, she would not be spending this much time on it. Outside the meeting room, the girl in the red tracksuit, the same one who had entered the elevator with him earlier, had already glanced toward the frosted glass door more than 100 times. Through the hazy silhouette on the glass, she could see the outlines of the boy and the editor inside. From 10 minutes ago until now, the conversation had never stopped. He had been inside for half an hour. The girl pulled down her mask to breathe, revealing a beautiful and delicate face. Her nose was small and refined, her lips a soft cherry pink, her eyes clear like flowing spring water. Her fair skin, hidden under the mask for too long, was slightly flushed. What kind of story did he bring? She wondered, curiosity flickering in her eyes. She understood this industry well. If his work had been uninteresting, the editor would never have spent this long on it. But as that thought settled, unease followed. The longer the wait dragged on, the easier it was to spiral into overthinking. In her mind, she had already replayed more than a dozen scenes of her own manuscript being mercilessly criticized once it was her turn. Inside the room, Yukino finally spoke. The core issue is balance, she said, tapping the pages lightly. You spent too much narrative weight on Futaba. It is obvious that the 2 main characters are Futaba and Kao, but where is Kao's presence? After reading all 3 chapters, Futaba's sensitivity, fear of being hurt, and longing to reconnect with Kao are very vivid. Her tone sharpened slightly. But Kao himself is vague. His appearance, his personality, his relationships with classmates, even whether he treats Futaba differently from other girls, none of that is clearly established. These details matter. In shoujo romance, the heroine is the emotional core, but if the male lead is underdeveloped, readers will struggle to immerse themselves. Yukino continued pointing things out without holding back. Here, and here, and here. Give Kao more room to act. And also expand on Futaba's friends. Honestly, those girls have great potential for conflict. They can easily stir up tension if written properly. Haruto lowered his head slightly, listening carefully and accepting every critique without argument. Fix these parts, Yukino said, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. After revisions, come find me directly tomorrow, or at the latest, the day after. Call this number before you come. She placed the card on the desk and looked at him. I'll keep your submission for now. Once the revisions are done, contact me directly. Don't try your luck with other publishers. Shoujo romance is one of Crimson Maple's main strengths. You chose us first for a reason. So, this means? Haruto asked cautiously. At least from my perspective, this work passes, Yukino replied, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. 3 days from now, the editorial department will hold a regular meeting to discuss open serialization slots left by completed works. Your revised manuscript must be on my desk before the day after tomorrow. Her meaning was clear. She saw potential in Blue Spring Ride, but whether it would secure a serialization slot depended on the final decision of the editorial meeting. For Haruto, this determined whether he would receive manuscript fees. For Crimson Maple, each new serialization was a matter of reputation and could not be decided lightly. I understand, Haruto said. Joy surged through him. Passing the review editor meant the work would be formally considered for serialization. That alone exceeded his expectations. Yukino had explicitly asked him not to submit elsewhere and to return after revisions. After a brief moment of thought, Haruto nodded seriously, exchanged a few polite words, and left the meeting room. At that moment, the girl in red, who had been waiting outside for 40 minutes, crossed paths with him as he stepped out. As they passed each other, she carefully examined his face. She entered the meeting room next and removed her mask out of courtesy. She had only worn it to avoid being recognized. If classmates found out she was submitting light novels, rumors would spread instantly at school. Reina Fujimoto, right? I'm Yukino Aoyama, the editor said, glancing at her information sheet and then at her again. A young and beautiful female author. Rare indeed. You two arrived one after the other, and you're both from the same high school, Yukino said, her expression a little strange. Do you know Haruto? Did you come together? Haruto. Reina Fujimoto blinked. Who's that? Oh. Then forget I asked, Yukino said, clearing her throat. But while the words were casual, they planted a seed. Reina's gaze turned thoughtful. Another student from Minamijo Third High School. Haruto. Her eyes drifted to the stack of manuscripts on Yukino's desk. The first page was visible. Blue Spring Ride by Haruto. In that instant, everything clicked. So he was a schoolmate. The corner of Reina's lips curved slightly upward. She had worried that submitting light novels instead of focusing on school would earn her scorn, which was why she hid behind a mask. But it seemed she was not alone. There was someone else at school just as unserious as she was. What a coincidence. Blue Spring Ride. She thought. What a terrible title. Yukino accepted the manuscript Reina handed over. Yesterday's Starlight. The title made her feel vaguely uncomfortable, but she said nothing. An editor's personal taste never represented the entire market. As she read more carefully, her expression gradually changed. 7 minutes passed. When Yukino looked up again, both her expression and attitude were noticeably more serious. This novel was interesting. She could not help wondering since when Minamijo Third High School had started producing so many promising writers. Outside, Haruto stepped out of the Crimson Maple building and glanced toward the office towers where the other 4 publishers were located. He let out a quiet sigh and abandoned the idea of submitting elsewhere. Yukino had already said she would bring Blue Spring Ride to the editorial meeting. She had pointed out clear weaknesses and shown genuine intent to work with him. Going behind her back now would require a level of shamelessness he simply did not possess. More importantly, Crimson Maple was the most suitable publisher among the 5 for a shoujo romance like Blue Spring Ride. If it could serialize here, that would be the best possible outcome. There was no need to gamble. Even if Yukino's proposal failed at the meeting, he could always submit to other publishers later. Losing a few days was nothing. By the time he realized it, it was already noon. Haruto stopped thinking about it further and boarded the bus home. Chapter 6, Revisions, Reality and a Very Tight Deadline. Haruto hummed a light tune all the way home, only to run into staff from the relevant authorities at his door. After all, his father had taken his own life after leaving behind massive debts, and the apartment Haruto currently lived in was listed as collateral. He let the officials inside to take photographs, chatted with them briefly, and signed several documents. Once they left, the weight in his chest immediately returned. There was no time to relax anymore. In at most 3 months, he would have to move out of the home he had lived in for 10 years. After that, he would be facing the pressure of survival head-on. He was only 16, and his family's circumstances had collapsed overnight, but grief and sadness could not consume him forever. Right now, the most important thing was figuring out the path his life would take from here. After seeing the officials off, Haruto did not rest. He immediately sat down and began revising the Blue Spring Ride manuscript according to the feedback Yukino had given him at Crimson Maple Literature. Her suggestions might not all be perfect, but if he wanted to submit to her, he had to respect her professional judgment. Besides, the changes did not affect the core structure of the story. That night, Haruto worked until late. Before he realized it, he had fallen asleep at his desk, pen still in hand. The next afternoon, he set out again, revised manuscript in his bag, heading for Crimson Maple Literature. He had already called ahead to schedule a meeting with Yukino. This time, the treatment he received was noticeably better than the day before. Instead of being led into a generic meeting room, the receptionist guided him into an elegantly furnished private office. She even proactively handed him a cup of freshly ground coffee, her attitude far warmer than before. Not long after, Yukino pushed the office door open. Unlike yesterday, when she had been on duty reviewing walk-in submissions and dressed formally, today she was not assigned to that role and did not need to wear business attire. The office building's heating ran all day. Even though it was cold outside, she was dressed lightly, as if it were autumn. She wore a light red jacket on top and a knee-length black skirt below. Her hair was tied into a single ponytail, fully revealing her refined and beautiful features. Her long legs, clad in black stockings, were slender and graceful, and her high heels produced a steady rhythm as she walked. She looked both elegant and full of vitality. "You work fast," Yukino said with a smile. Haruto paused for a moment and quickly pulled himself together. He was, after all, a teenage boy, and Yukino was far more attractive than his ex-girlfriend Rin, who had dumped him a month ago. In real life, he rarely encountered women like her. It was the kind of beauty he usually only saw on television. Completely ignoring her presence was not easy. "The sections that needed changes weren't very large," Haruto replied, handing over the revised manuscript. "I stayed up late and finished most of it in one night." Yukino took the pages, then looked at him and smiled lightly. "Would you like to listen to some music?" "Music?" Haruto was momentarily taken aback, then nodded. "Sure." Yukino walked over to a cabinet beside her desk, took out a vinyl record, and placed it onto a turntable. Soon, a deep, clear piano melody filled the room, rich and layered. "This is a piano piece called Toward the Light, composed by the foreign piano master Borg nearly half a century ago," Yukino said calmly. "This record itself is from that era. It's one of my favorite pieces to listen to when I need to focus." After speaking, she crossed her right leg over her left, relaxed her posture, propped her chin on her pale wrist, and began flipping through Haruto's manuscript page by page. She read. Haruto had nothing to do but sit quietly, listening to the music and watching her. A beautiful woman paired with beautiful music. He certainly did not feel bored. After all, Yukino had already read most of the manuscript the day before. This time, she was only checking whether the details she had previously pointed out had been revised properly. The result pleased her. At the very least, this manuscript would not be a problem to submit to the serialization meeting. The length was sufficient as well. 3 chapters of content was more than enough. In most editorial meetings, reviewers would not even read that much, usually only 1 or 2 chapters at most. That did not mean there were no remaining issues. There were many details she had not discussed yesterday. "All right, Haruto," Yukino said, lifting her gaze to study him. Her cherry-colored lips parted slightly. "How many chapters do you expect this novel to have in total?" Haruto hesitated, falling into thought. Over this period of time, on roughly half the nights, he had experienced fragments of Shiori's soul memories while dreaming. He had learned a lot about that other world, but more importantly, through these days of trial and exploration, he had discovered something crucial. Any memories he saw in his dreams could be repeatedly accessed once he was awake. As long as he guided his thoughts correctly, he could revisit them over and over in his mind. For example, the first time he watched Blue Spring ride through Shiori's memories, he could now replay it mentally at will, even scrubbing through it like a video. So although the continuation of the story had not yet appeared in his dreams, he had still absorbed the basic information shown on streaming sites back then. The anime had 12 episodes. The original manga had over 100 chapters. Haruto's novel adaptation was based on Shiori's memories. He was certain she had watched the entire anime. She was not the type to abandon a series halfway through. Once she started watching something, she always finished it. It was practically a compulsion for her. That meant the latter half of the anime definitely existed in her memories. As for whether she had gone on to read the manga afterward, that was uncertain. Because of that, Haruto could only base his estimate on the anime's content, not the manga. "The complete story should be finished within about 15 chapters, Haruto answered. Roughly speaking, 1 chapter of his novel corresponded to 1 anime episode, sometimes slightly shorter. Adapting 12 episodes into 15 chapters was more than feasible. "I see. That length would put it in the short to mid-range," Yukino said after thinking for a moment, then smiled. That makes sense. You're a new author, after all. If you told me you planned to write a 30 or 40 chapter work that could run for dozens of magazine issues, I would seriously question your ability to maintain narrative control. She straightened her posture, lifting her chin slightly as she looked directly at Haruto. Now then, Yukino said. Let's get to the important part. Chapter 7, so this is what serialization actually means. I don't know how familiar you are with our publishing house, so let me give you a general overview, Yukino said calmly. Crimson Maple Literature currently publishes 103 different magazines of various types. We are one of the 5 major serialization publishers in this prefecture. Among those 103 magazines, there are true weekly issues, monthly issues, and even annual releases. Most of this information was already familiar to Haruto. Japan's otaku culture was highly developed, unlike the Japan from Shiori's memories. Light novel magazines there were often bi-weekly or monthly. In that other world, Japan was famous for anime and manga. Light novels were usually released as standalone volumes with irregular schedules, while manga and anime were typically updated weekly. Here, light novels were primarily serialized. The system resembled the way classic writers once serialized novels in newspapers, releasing new chapters daily. Of course, once a light novel gained popularity through serialization, it would inevitably be published as collected volumes. If money could be earned twice, no publisher would turn that down. From this perspective, light novel industry functioned very similarly to its domestic manga industry. The only real difference lay in the medium. The more culturally developed a region was, the harsher its demands became regarding update frequency. Some popular magazines were even released every 3 days. Each serialized novel in such magazines typically published several thousand words. Updating at that pace meant producing new content every 3 days, which was no less brutal than web novel schedules. The difference was simply that one was printed, while the other existed online. In a country of over 100 million people, there were plenty of writers who could write well, and plenty who could write fast. But to truly survive in such a ruthless industry, one had to do both. If you wanted to make a living from this profession, you needed to withstand that level of pressure. Otherwise, factories were always hiring, and those jobs had far fewer requirements. Given your current standing, Yukino continued, our flagship magazine, Crimson Maple, is out of the question. The editorial board would never agree to let an unproven newcomer test the waters in our main publication. Crimson Maple was Crimson Maple Literature's highest circulation light novel magazine, selling around 700,000 copies per issue. It was a classic triweekly publication. Technically, it was called a 3-day issue, but in practice it was released every Wednesday and Sunday to build reader habits, alternating between 3-day and 4-day gaps. Hearing this, Haruto felt a slight sense of disappointment, even though he knew it was reasonable. Honestly, from my personal perspective, Yukino said gently, your Blue Spring Ride is more interesting than many of the works currently serialized in Crimson Maple. The problem is your resume. Our upper management is cautious, not the type to gamble. So, young man, keep working hard. Build up a solid serialization record, and getting into Crimson Maple might not be an issue in the future. She paused briefly, then continued. As for magazines within our company that suit Blue Spring Ride's genre and currently have vacancies due to series ending or being cancelled, there are 3 options. First, searching for a sound. It has 1 open slot. Second, Fleeting Blossoms, which has 2 openings. Third, Orange Heart, which currently has 3 vacant slots. All 3 magazines specialized in shoujo romance light novels. Searching for Sound sold around 130,000 copies per issue and was considered a fairly popular magazine under Crimson Maple Literature. Orange Heart sold only around 30,000 copies per issue and was considered a niche publication. As for Fleeting Blossoms, it sold around 250,000 copies per issue and occasionally exceeded 300,000. It was Crimson Maple Literature's 3rd highest circulation magazine. Most of its serialized works were high-quality submissions that had narrowly lost out at editorial meetings to even stronger competitors and therefore failed to secure spots in Crimson Maple. Rather than abandoning those manuscripts, the publisher gathered them here. It could be understood as a magazine for works that had competed for Crimson Maple and fallen just short. Unlike Crimson Maple, which never serialized debut authors, Fleeting Blossoms was different. As long as the editorial meeting agreed that a work had potential, even a newcomer could be serialized. After Yukino's explanation, Haruto gradually understood the relative standing of the 3 magazines. Without question, Fleeting Blossoms was the best choice, followed by Searching for Sound. Magazine circulation determined a work's reach. No matter how good a novel was, if it serialized in a magazine with only 20 or 30,000 readers, its influence would be limited. Manuscript fees were also tied directly to the platform where the novel was serialized. So, Yukino said, folding her fingers together and resting her chin on her hands as she looked at Haruto, I will argue for Blue Spring Ride to secure a serialization slot in one of these 3 magazines at the meeting the day after tomorrow. Before that, I wanted to inform you properly. If you have any opinions or preferences, now is the time to say so. I'm fine with Blue Spring Ride being serialized in Fleeting Blossoms or Searching for Sound, Haruto replied. But Orange Heart? I'd rather pass. A magazine with only 30,000 in circulation offered limited manuscript fees, and more importantly, it would waste Blue Spring Ride's potential. This was a story that had broken through the same competitive industry in a parallel world, rising from a manga to anime, film, and novel adaptations. What Yukino had seen so far was only the early portion of the story. The true highlights had not even been written yet. The actual depth and appeal of the work far exceeded the impression formed from the first 3 chapters. In truth, Blue Spring Ride would have been more than worthy of serialization in Crimson Maple. Its quality was easily at that level. Unfortunately, Haruto's status as a complete newcomer made the upper management unwilling to approve it. That reality would not change no matter which publisher he submitted to. He could accept serialization in magazines with circulation in the hundreds of thousands, but if it were relegated to Orange Heart, he would rather submit elsewhere. I understand, Yukino said after a brief pause, nodding. Your opinion will be respected. Then our preliminary cooperation agreement is settled, she said, smiling brightly. For a moment, the office seemed filled with a vivid warmth. She extended her slender, pale hand toward him. I hope we work well together. If everything goes smoothly, in 3 days, you may officially become one of my contracted authors. Haruto paused, then reached out and shook her hand. Although your work hasn't passed the serialization meeting yet, Yukino said with a smile, from my position, I need to give you some early advice so you can prepare ahead of time. While you still have free time, you should thoroughly plan the remaining plot of Blue Spring Ride before serialization begins. The meeting result is still unknown, but you should assume your work will pass. Fleeting Blossoms and Searching for Sound are both tri-weekly magazines. They are released across the prefecture every Wednesday and Sunday. A 15-chapter novel would only take 1 or 2 months to finish serialization. When the deadline approaches, don't come to me saying you're stuck, out of ideas, and unable to submit. At that point, I will chase you relentlessly. No matter what it takes, even if I have to force you to stay awake for 3 days straight, I will squeeze every last drop of creativity out of you and make sure the manuscript is delivered on time. She paused briefly, as if realizing her wording might be ambiguous, and added a couple of clarifying words. And one more thing. If your story collapses later on, the publisher may cancel it. But as a contracted author, you are absolutely forbidden from disappearing or abandoning the work mid-serialization. If you do. Her smile remained gentle, but her tone turned unmistakably dangerous. I will not be this easy to talk to. Haruto's heart skipped. He knew very well that he only fully understood the first half of Blue Spring Ride's plot. But at this moment, a man could not afford to lose momentum. Don't worry, Aoyama-san, he said confidently. If I've stepped into the light novel industry, I never planned on getting stuck. So far, my creative process has always been smooth and uninterrupted. That was true in the past, and it will remain true in the future. Hiatuses, delays, cancellations, those words have nothing to do with me in this lifetime. His voice was firm and spirited. Even he was carried away by his own confidence. Good, Yukino said. She sat back down, tilting her head slightly as her clear eyes carefully examined his face. In the end, she nodded with satisfaction. Also, don't call me Aoyama-san anymore. Just call me Yukino. Seeing her expression, Haruto immediately corrected himself. Yukino. She smiled, clearly pleased. All right, I won't take up any more of your time. In at most 3 days, you'll know the result of Blue Spring Ride at our serialization meeting. Haruto quickly left her office. To be honest, the latter half of their conversation had placed considerable pressure on him. Especially when she talked about delays and abandoned works, the threat in her tone was very real. He felt guilty. So distracted by his thoughts was he that he didn't notice brushing past a masked girl as he entered the elevator. She was the same girl who had submitted her manuscript alongside him the day before. Reina turned her head curiously and watched Haruto's departing figure until the elevator doors closed. After thinking for a few seconds, she adjusted the revised yesterday's Starlight manuscript in her hands and headed toward Yukino's office. Chapter 8, Before the New Term, 2 student authors prepare. You're here again. Yukino felt a strange sense of coincidence the moment Reina arrived. It had been the same yesterday. She had just finished reviewing Haruto's manuscript when Reina came in to submit hers. And today was no different. She had just seen Haruto out, and less than half a minute later, Reina appeared once more. Both of them were students from the same high school, and neither of them knew the other. Yukino quickly brushed these irrelevant thoughts out of her mind and refocused on her work. On-site manuscript reviews like this were part of Crimson Maple Literature's editor's daily routine. Editors took turns being on duty. In reality, although dozens of people might come to submit manuscripts in a single day, it was very common for none of those submissions to be worth keeping. Most novice authors preferred to submit by mail. Not everyone lived in the same city, and not everyone had the time or confidence to show up in person. But yesterday was different. Yukino had received 2 on-site submissions that she genuinely felt had potential. One was, of course, Haruto's Blue Spring Ride. The other was Reina's yesterday's Starlight. Although she felt that yesterday's Starlight was slightly weaker than Blue Spring Ride in terms of emotional pull, it was still a very engaging novel overall. Because of that, Yukino also planned to submit yesterday's Starlight for review at the upcoming Serialization meeting. She had asked Reina to revise a few details and bring the manuscript back today, which was why their discussion now closely mirrored the conversation she had previously had with Haruto. Yesterday's Starlight and Blue Spring Ride belonged to very similar genres, and the magazines suitable for their serialization largely overlapped. In other words, the 2 novels were, in fact, competing with each other. The difference was that Reina was not as selective as Haruto. As long as her novel passed the serialization meeting, she did not mind even if it ended up in Orange Heart, a magazine with only 30,000 to 40,000 copies in circulation. So I need to remind you, Yukino said seriously, her expression firm. The result of the serialization meeting is still unknown. You need to be mentally prepared for both outcomes, whether your work passes or not. If it doesn't pass, adjust your mindset and don't get discouraged. But if it does pass, the pressure will not be light. I don't want to see your novel fall behind schedule, get abandoned, collapse in quality, or end prematurely due to slow writing speed or any other reason. Since your school still has 2 or 3 days before the new term starts, use this time to flesh out the later plot as much as possible. I understand. Thank you for the reminder, Aoyama-san, Reina replied, her expression turning solemn. She was just an ordinary high school girl. Despite her good looks, she had almost no real-world experience. Writing novels was simply her hobby and her dream, something she had been secretly doing without her family's knowledge. Hearing Yukino speak so seriously naturally put pressure on her. Hiatuses, unfinished endings, creative burnout. Reina honestly did not know whether she would encounter such problems if she truly became a serialized light novel author. After all, she had only spent half a month outlining yesterday's Starlight up to chapter 4 before mustering the courage to submit it. She had no real confidence about whether she could smoothly continue writing the later parts. Don't call me Aoyama-san, Yukino frowned slightly as she corrected her. Just call me Yukino. Reina nodded. Her mind then drifted to the boy she had brushed past earlier, the one who seemed to be from the same school. She remembered that the author name on his manuscript's first page had been Haruto. There were only 2 days left before school started. If he really was a classmate, she might try to pay attention after the term began. Writing romance novels in secret and submitting them without her family's knowledge made Reina feel conflicted. In her parents' eyes, she was an exemplary student. Among relatives and acquaintances, she was the refined, well-behaved young lady. She did not dare reveal what she truly enjoyed. Yet discovering that someone else at her school was doing the same thing gave her an unexpected sense of kinship. Haruto returned home and finally let out a long breath. After being busy with this for several days, things had finally gotten off to a good start. Still, Yukino's words that day lingered in his mind. The 3 chapters he had submitted were nowhere near enough. What really mattered was the story that came next. Without wasting any time, he dropped his bag and went straight to his room to write. In the blink of an eye, 2 days passed. The date became February 5. It was the day of Crimson Maple Literature's serialization meeting. Early that morning, Yukino arrived at the company carrying the manuscripts she intended to submit. Inside the company, the atmosphere was already tense. Competition existed everywhere. On ordinary days, editors got along well enough, but at serialization meetings, it was a different story. Sharp words flew, and everyone fought for their own candidates. Every editor wanted the novels they had selected to successfully earn serialization slots in the company's magazines. At 9 o'clock sharp, all editors entered the largest conference room and took their seats around a round table. The atmosphere was solemn. Crimson Maple Literature was best known for youth romance novels, though it accepted submissions of all genres. Among the 5 major light novel publishers in Minamijo City, Crimson Maple held a clear reputation advantage in the romance category. Every day and every week, the number of manuscripts submitted to Crimson Maple was enormous. Editors could only select a handful of works they personally believed in and bring those to the serialization meeting. Time was limited, so only the very best could be considered. As for whether a work ultimately passed, that was decided collectively by all editors present and the editor-in-chief. The final authority lay with the editor-in-chief. Everyone else could only present their arguments. At 9:10, the editor-in-chief, Akira Kurikawa, took her seat. She was in her early 40s, elegant in demeanor and slender in build. The sharpness in her gaze behind her glasses revealed her keen judgment. Since romance submissions dominated, the editorial team was composed mostly of women, roughly 60 to 70%. As the meeting began, each editor had neatly organized stacks of manuscripts beside them. In total, more than 30 selected novels awaited review. First, the opening submission, an editor began. That summer we bloomed, a new work by veteran light novel author Chisaki-sensei, who has collaborated with us for 4 years. The plot is delicate, and the character settings show clear breakthroughs compared to her previous works. As the editor introduced the novel, the sound of pages flipping filled the room. 2 minutes later, discussion erupted. I don't think the first chapter is very gripping. This kind of timid heroine doesn't get great market feedback lately. But that's not absolute. A newcomer might struggle with this type of protagonist, but Chisaki-sensei's skill is well known. Her previous work ran in Crimson Maple for 3 months and received excellent reviews. Even so, this opening chapter is clearly less engaging, so it's hard to directly compare the two. Yukino remained silent throughout. The editors debating now were all aiming for the single available serialization slot in Crimson Maple, the company's flagship magazine. That had nothing to do with her. She had no manuscript suitable for Crimson Maple this time. Although she believed Blue Spring Ride was good enough, Haruto's status as a newcomer was a fatal drawback. Editor-in-chief would never risk approving it for the flagship magazine. After about a minute of debate, Akira spoke. Pending. Chapter 9, the editorial meeting begins. All conversation in the meeting room fell silent at once. The editors moved on without wasting a second, picking up the second manuscript and continuing their review. Each novel only received a few minutes of discussion. With dozens of manuscripts to evaluate, the meeting was bound to last 2 to 3 hours at minimum. The meaning of pending was clear. Akira had acknowledged that the first chapter of that novel was strong enough to qualify for serialization in Crimson Maple. However, if it was not the most outstanding submission in this entire meeting, it still had no chance. After all, there was only one open slot in that flagship magazine. At the same time, over at Minamijo Third High School, the opening ceremony for the second semester of second year was underway. Within the lineup of Class 2, Year 2, Haruto stood with dark circles under his eyes. Over the past few days, he had been burning the midnight oil, adapting everything he had already seen of Blue Spring Ride into a total of 7 chapters of novel text. Unfortunately, over the last 2 nights, the memories from Shiori's soul had shifted again. Instead of continuing Blue Spring Ride, she had been watching other anime. There were romance titles like Suzuka, and then there were isekai and fantasy series such as Kyokaramo. And various healing hero shows. Suzuka was fine. Watching it through the soul memories actually pulled Haruto in quite deeply. But Kyokaramo was another matter entirely. Even though he had only seen a few episodes through fragmented memories, if he was not mistaken, that series leaned heavily into boys' love themes. Watching it left him feeling thoroughly uncomfortable. These shows left him stunned. He could only admire how wildly diverse and intense the tastes of creators in that parallel world were. What shocked him most was that Shiori, this cute, soft-looking girl, seemed to enjoy absolutely everything, watching all of it with great enthusiasm. It became increasingly clear that not every work from that other world was suitable for adaptation here. None of the recent anime he had seen in his dreams would work in the domestic market at all. This was bad. Shiori, pull yourself together. Hurry up and watch Blue Spring Ride. If the serialization meeting approved Blue Spring Ride today, Haruto really did not want Yukino showing up at his house with a metaphorical knife in hand, demanding chapters a few weeks later. As he thought this, the dark circles under his eyes seemed even more pronounced. The opening ceremony ended quickly. It was mostly just formalities. From the next day onward, the students' second semester lives would officially begin. Their homeroom teacher gave an impassioned speech about how there were only 400 days left until university entrance exams. He urged everyone to work hard, struggle forward, and abandon novels, anime, and games, claiming that studying was the only true path. Naturally, almost no one listened. What did catch Haruto's attention, however, was his girlfriend. No, his ex-girlfriend. Rin sat in the same row as him, barely a meter away. Dressed in a white school uniform, she looked youthful and eye-catching, drawing the attention of many boys in the class. During winter break, after Haruto's family situation collapsed, Rin had immediately broken up with him upon learning the truth. Since they were classmates, there was no way to completely avoid each other. She chose to pretend he did not exist, avoiding any awkwardness. Seeing her attitude, the last trace of lingering affection in Haruto's heart finally faded away. Hey, Rin, weren't you and Haruto pretty close before? Why are you not saying a word to him today? A classmate asked. Close? We were just ordinary classmates. Don't overthink it, Rin replied, glancing briefly at Haruto. His mother had passed away early. His father had taken his own life during winter break. The family had gone bankrupt. Yet Haruto had not dropped out. That surprised her. He must have relatives supporting him, she assumed. Still, no matter how she looked at it, he was probably one of the most pitiful people in the entire school now. Staying involved with him would only invite ridicule about her poor judgment, and there would be no benefits at all. Worse, he might even come asking her for money. All sorts of imagined scenarios played out in Rin's mind. If she were not studying finance, she could have become a novelist with that imagination. They had only confirmed their relationship near the end of the previous semester. It had lasted less than a month before collapsing during winter break. The time was too short, and no one in class had even known they were dating. A gentle breeze drifted through the classroom, lifting the student's hair slightly. Lost in thought about his novel's serialization prospects, Haruto gradually zoned out. Rin frowned. The more she tried to ignore him, the harder it became. His calm, detached attitude toward her, toward school, toward everything made her uncomfortable. It felt as if the one who had been dumped was actually handling things better than she was. Tomorrow, school would truly begin. Next, the 22nd novel under review. Blue Spring Ride. Proposed serialization magazines, Fleeting Blossoms and Searching for Sound. Yukino stood up and introduced Blue Spring Ride to the editors present. Around the table, pages rustled as the editors flipped through the manuscript. In this meeting, 5 novels were competing for the 2 open serialization slots in Fleeting Blossoms. The competition was fierce. 30 seconds later, subtle changes appeared on the editors' faces. They were all veterans with sharp eyes. Most novels did not differ dramatically in reading experience at the first chapter stage, since the plot had not fully unfolded yet. But Blue Spring Ride's first chapter was genuinely engaging. From the very beginning, it established that the male and female leads had once harbored mutual feelings. Then came their reunion 3 years later. Just as everyone expected old emotions to resurface, the male lead delivered a decisive line. "We can't go back to how things were." That single sentence defined their relationship. At the end, the heroine Futaba's unwilling inner monologue, her refusal to accept that her connection with Kao had ended just like that, sparked a strong sense of anticipation for the second chapter. The depiction of Futaba's relationships, emotions, and inner turmoil left a faint ache and bittersweet pain in everyone's hearts after finishing the first chapter. These editors had read countless novels. Ordinary works could not stir their emotions at all. "This is pretty good. The quality is solid. I don't think it works. The first chapter lays out the relationships too clearly. The male lead so calmly telling the heroine that their past is over, where does the story go from there? The heroine chasing after him? A lot of female readers hate that. No one likes stories where the heroine turns into a doormat. That's a fair point. Wait, this author is a newcomer? And if I'm reading this right, he's male? A student. Seriously? A male high school student writing shoujo romance? That was written by a boy? Are you kidding me? Do high school boys understand girls' inner feelings this well now? Honestly, a guy trying to serialize a shoujo romance feels off. Even if the first chapter is good, the later plot will probably collapse. I don't believe a group of high school boys who have barely dated anyone can write a romance novel with a female protagonist that female readers genuinely enjoy. The editors talked over one another, the meeting room descending into chaos. Compared to earlier discussions, the debate surrounding Blue Spring Ride was far more intense. Editors with competing interests showed no mercy during serialization meetings. They clung to every possible weakness and attacked relentlessly to eliminate strong rivals. This submission includes the first 3 chapters, Yukino said calmly. I have read them carefully. The situation is not as some of you suggest. In fact, from chapter 1 to chapter 3, Blue Spring Ride becomes more engaging. I personally believe that even if this novel were serialized in Crimson Maple, it would rank among the top 3 in popularity. The only reason I proposed placing it in Fleeting Blossoms is because the author, Haruto, is a newcomer. I hope that when we evaluate this novel, we focus on its plot and quality rather than fixating on the author's background. That's just your opinion, a female editor competing with Yukino countered immediately. Our company doesn't need to take that risk. Fleeting Blossoms is our 3rd best-selling magazine. I propose that Blue Spring Ride be serialized in Searching for Sound instead. She knew perfectly well that the manuscript she had submitted could not compete with Blue Spring Ride in terms of emotional impact or quality. Since she could not win on merit, she naturally tried to steer the discussion to eliminate a powerful competitor. This was where the editor-in-chief's role became crucial. Akira considered for a moment, then instructed her assistant to bring over the next 2 chapters of Blue Spring Ride and distribute them to the editors. Serialization meetings prioritized efficiency. No one had time to read 3 or 4 chapters of every novel. However, when opinions were sharply divided and a manuscript had additional material available, it was acceptable to spend extra time on 1 or 2 high-quality contenders. 5 minutes passed. The entire meeting room fell silent. There was no denying it. The first 3 chapters of Blue Spring Ride grew more compelling with each one. Futaba became increasingly lovable as a heroine. Her emotional development with Kao, her daily life with friends and classmates at school, all unfolded naturally. It truly lived up to its title. The atmosphere of adolescence rushed forward, stirring memories of youthful innocence and first love in the hearts of the female editors. Could this really have been written by a 16-year-old boy? It felt almost unbelievable. Approved, Akira said softly, placing the manuscript down with a smile. Though she was in her 40s, her voice and movements remained elegant. This time, not a single editor objected. After 3 consecutive chapters of such quality, continuing to attack based on earlier arguments would have been pointless. And unlike pending, this verdict was approved, a clear acknowledgement of Blue Spring Ride's quality. Hearing those words, Yukino finally let out a long breath. Chapter 10, where manuscripts compete for survival. The meeting lasted until nearly noon, stretching close to 3 full hours. As for the final outcome, Yukino returned with a haul that could only be described as overwhelming. Based on her initial expectations, given the quality of Blue Spring Ride, there was a very high probability that it would secure a serialization slot in Fleeting Blossoms. The only real risk had been the other editors fixating on Haruto's status as a student and a complete newcomer, using that point to repeatedly attack the proposal and potentially sink it. However, judging from the actual proceedings, all of those objections were completely crushed by the novel's quality during the meeting. After all, decisions ultimately came down to the work itself. Only when 2 competing novels were of roughly equal quality would factors like the author's past record, stability, and popularity come into play. Yukino had spent some effort defending her position, but the successful approval of Blue Spring Ride had still been well within her expectations. What truly surprised her was Reina's submission, Yesterday's Starlight. The quality of Yesterday's Starlight was solid, but its first chapter progressed at a slightly slower pace. The real highlights were in chapters 2 and 3. Yukino had originally believed that proposing it for Fleeting Blossoms would be quite difficult, and that the editorial department would most likely assign it to searching for sound instead. What she had not anticipated was that, in this particular meeting, 5 novels were competing for the 2 open slots in Fleeting Blossoms. Aside from Blue Spring Ride, none of the other 4 stood out in any decisive way when compared head-to-head. Yesterday's Starlight might have been slow, but the other 3 were not significantly stronger either. Those 3 novels, however, were written by veteran authors who had previously collaborated with the publisher. On paper, that gave them a clear advantage over Reina, who was also just a student. But reality was unpredictable. Advantages and disadvantages could flip in an instant. An experienced author submitting a new work naturally held an edge over a newcomer, but that advantage evaporated if the author carried a troublesome past. Among the 3 competing authors, one had previously serialized a novel with Crimson Maple Literature. During that run, her husband had cheated on her, causing her mental state to collapse. She had completely given up on the novel, rushed the ending with nonsense, and left it unfinished. The publisher had received hundreds of complaint letters from readers as a result. Another author had serialized 4 novels with Crimson Maple Literature in the past. 3 of them had collapsed in quality midway through, losing popularity so badly that the publisher had forcibly cancelled them. He had even been placed on an internal blacklist and was infamous for strong openings and disastrous endings. The 3rd author had gone missing during serialization the previous year. Editors could not reach him for manuscripts, and the novel was forced to suspend publication for 3 issues. It was later discovered that he had lost heavily in gambling, lost all motivation to write, and had gone off traveling without a care in the world. When these histories were exposed during the meeting, Akira's expression darkened immediately. She made a decisive call. She would rather trust another high school newcomer than gamble on those 3 again. After all, with Haruto already setting a precedent by passing as a student author, the idea of approving Reina's work became far easier to accept. As a result, Yukino's gains from this meeting were enormous. Fleeting Blossoms, Crimson Maple Literature's 3rd highest circulation magazine, had exactly 2 open serialization slots. Both of them went to her. Her black stockings carried her forward in light, confident steps. Her hair was tied up in a neat bun, and a satisfied smile played on her lips. Her fair, delicate face radiated confidence. She was beautiful, and her bearing was just as striking. "Yukino, you haven't eaten yet, right? Let's go have lunch together." As lunchtime approached, Akira stopped Yukino with a smile. Yukino's expression stiffened slightly. Still, with the editor-in-chief extending such a gracious invitation, she could hardly refuse. After all, Akira had arranged her position at Crimson Maple Literature, and Yukino worked directly under her. At a mid to high-end restaurant near the company, the 2 took their seats. Before long, wine and sishes were served. "Come to think of it, you've been at Crimson Maple Literature for a year now," Akira said, taking a light sip of red wine as she looked at Yukino. "Your father has called several times, telling you not to waste time in Minamijo City and to come work at his company instead." No, Akira-san," Yukino said quickly. "I'm only interested in novels and otaku culture. Being a light novel editor is already fun enough for me. I really don't want to go back and get scolded by that old fossil." Akira studied Yukino carefully for a moment, then smiled gently. "Well, I respect your choice. But your father said that if you keep disobeying him, he'll cancel your credit card starting tomorrow. He didn't want to argue with you, so he asked me to pass the message along." "What?" Yukino's beautiful face went completely blank. "Is he a demon or what? That's cruel." She clenched her fists. "Then I'll go max out that credit card this afternoon." "Humph. I earn a salary here anyway. I won't starve. I'm not giving in." Seeing this, Akira calmly raised her wine glass, elegantly sipping it while enjoying the seafood on her plate. The morning ended, along with homeroom teacher's long-winded speech. Today was just the opening ceremony. Actual classes would begin the next day. After dismissal, everyone prepared to head home and brace themselves for the new term. Haruto. Just as Haruto was about to leave school, someone patted his shoulder. "Kaido? What's up?" Haruto asked. Kaido Moriyama was a classmate of his. They got along fairly well. "Well, do you know Reina Fujimoto?" Kaido asked. "Of course I know her," Haruto replied without hesitation. "She's the top student since enrollment. First place in every subject from day one. Not just finals, even the monthly exams, she's never dropped to second. She's good looking, her family's rich, and she's a famous young lady at school. Who doesn't know her? He paused briefly before continuing. But why are you asking? That's not what I meant, Kaito said quickly. I mean, do you and her have any contact? Like knowing each other privately, or being friends? No, Haruto said, puzzled. Why do you ask? If you're secretly into her and too embarrassed to pass her a love letter, I can help you deliver it. But I really don't have any connection with her. It's nothing, Kaito laughed awkwardly. Just curious. Forget I asked. With that, he slung his backpack over his shoulder and hurried away. Haruto was left looking confused. Walking off in the distance, Kaito was just as baffled. That's weird, he muttered to himself. If Haruto doesn't know Reina, why would she ask me about him? Kaito and Reina had been classmates in middle school. After entering high school, they barely interacted anymore. At most, they would exchange greetings in the hallway. Yet after the opening ceremony, Reina had mysteriously stopped him, asking about Haruto. No way. Reina couldn't possibly have a crush on Haruto. Kaito's gossip instincts flared for half a second before dying out. Forget it. That's impossible. Her standards couldn't be that low. Maybe she actually likes me and was just too shy to say it directly, so she used Haruto as an excuse to start a conversation. Had. A strange smile crept onto his face. Around 2 in the afternoon, Haruto was at home reviewing the next parts of Blue Spring Ride. At the same time, Rain sat in her family's villa, playing the piano to calm her nerves as she waited for a certain result. Almost one after the other, they received a call from Yukino. Blue Spring Ride has passed the serialization decision for Fleeting Blossoms. Come to Crimson Maple Literature when you have time to complete the contract signing. Yesterday's Starlight has passed the serialization decision for Fleeting Blossoms. Come to Crimson Maple Literature when you have time to complete the contract signing. After hanging up, Haruto let out a long breath. He knew that once the contract was signed, he would receive a substantial manuscript fee. At least in the short term, both his studies and his living situation would be secured, and the immediate survival crisis would be averted. On the other side, Reina's heart pounded wildly after she hung up. Her fair cheeks flushed red. Just a minute ago, her fingers had flown steadily across the piano keys. Now, they trembled slightly. It passed, serialization, a contract. The sense of achievement welling up inside her was something she could not suppress. It was stronger than the satisfaction she felt from repeatedly crushing her competition in exams over the past year, from firmly holding the top academic position in her grade. Being first in exams had been her normal since first grade. For her, first place was routine. Falling to second would have been a disaster. But having her novel accepted for serialization so smoothly was different. This was an unexpected surprise in her life. She gently clenched her fist. Chapter 11, Contract signed and officially a light novel author. Haruto had arranged to meet Yukino at exactly 3:30 p.m. He was the type who hated being late, and he hated waiting around for other people even more. So he timed it perfectly, stepped into Crimson Maple Literature's office area at 3:28, and headed straight for the office where he had met Yukino before. The door was not locked. He twisted the handle, stepped inside, and froze. Shopping bags were piled around the room, stuffed with newly bought clothes, shoes, figures, and random hobby goods. Some bags had clear tags, and some were gaping open just enough to reveal what was inside. Maid outfits, doctor coats, nurse uniforms, and even a sleek-looking mecha suit. If Haruto was not mistaken, these were cosplay costumes, the kind you would see everywhere at a big convention. And he was not just guessing. Even the styles felt familiar. Most of the designs were clearly inspired by recent hit anime and popular game characters that had been trending across the otaku scene. Did I walk into the wrong office? Haruto's brain stuttered. It had only been 2 days since he was last here. How could the whole atmosphere feel completely different? Then his eyes shifted to the desk. Yukino was sitting there, resting her chin in both hands, cheeks puffed slightly, glaring into space with an unmistakably irritated expression. Her beautiful face looked like it was silently declaring war on the entire world. Of course, Haruto had no idea that Yukino was furious because her father was about to cut off her credit card starting tomorrow. Even after storming through a shopping mall downtown at lunch and swiping it like a woman possessed, she still had not managed to calm down. But professionalism was professionalism. No matter how annoyed she was, she had still immediately called Haruto to tell him Blue Spring Ride had passed the serialization meeting, and she had told him to come in as soon as possible to sign. "You're here." It took Yukino a few seconds after he entered to fully snap back to reality. Then she straightened, took a quiet breath, and visibly adjusted her expression like she was flipping a switch. A moment later, the composed, intelligent, confident, dependable editor Yukino Aoyama was back. Haruto hesitated. Did I come at a bad time?" Yukino glanced at him, and that quiet grown-up pressure rose in her gaze, the kind that made high schoolers instinctively sit up straighter. "It's exactly 3:30. You're on time." As she spoke, she slid a contract across the desk toward him. "Congratulations, Haruto. Your debut went off without a hitch. You've secured the right to serialize in Fleeting Blossoms." She tapped the papers once. "This is our standard agreement. Read it carefully. If you have no objections, then once you sign, our partnership officially begins." Haruto took the contract and began reading. The first thing he looked for was the manuscript fee. Fleeting Blossoms published twice a week. Its circulation per issue was in the hundreds of thousands, often pushing well past 200,000 and sometimes higher. A magazine like that did not pay peanuts. Of course, the exact rate depended on several things. The quality of the submission, the author's standing in the industry, popularity, fanbase, and the editorial department's assessment of the work's long-term potential. Since Haruto was a total newcomer, Crimson Maple Literature had offered him a baseline rate of 67,800 yen per chapter. That number was clearly defined as the minimum. It was not a rigid ceiling. If the series took off and reader support exploded, the rate would rise. If a chapter ran longer than usual, the payment would increase accordingly. But no matter what, it would not drop below the amount printed in the contract. Haruto did the math in his head. 4 weeks in a month, 2 issues per week, which meant his novel would publish at least 8 chapters a month once serialization started. At the absolute minimum, that came out to 542,400 yen per month. It was a substantial amount. For an ordinary household, that was not pocket change. For a 16-year-old who had just stepped into the industry, it was the kind of number that could change the shape of his life. But he also knew something important. For serialized novels, manuscript fees were only one part of the money. The real battlefield was rights. Japan was strict about intellectual property, and the industry's legal framework was well established. Companies could not simply crush creators and steal their work the way people like to imagine in cynical rumors. Authors were still weaker than corporations in negotiation power, sure, but they were not helpless dolls either. Even as a newcomer, the contract Crimson Maple offered him was within normal bounds. The copyright and authorship of Blue Spring Ride belonged entirely to Haruto. What Crimson Maple wanted was the commercial operation right. In other words, if the series gained enough popularity to be adapted, then every major step of that process would involve the publisher. Manga adaptation discussions, anime production committees, game collaborations, merchandise, and print volume releases. Crimson Maple would participate, hold decision-making authority in negotiations, and take 20% of the profits from those commercial ventures. But they were not taking that cut for nothing. A typical light novel author did not have the connections, bargaining power, or industry network to chase down adaptation partners alone. Publishers were the ones who arranged introductions, handled business talks, invested in promotion, and kept the entire machine moving. So while the clause was not generous, it was also not outrageous. It was simply the standard reality of the market. If you were a legendary author, you could negotiate, and you might even keep tighter control over rights and revenue. But as a rookie, dreaming about that kind of leverage was pointless. Crimson Maple Literature was a business, not a charity. Once he finished scanning the key terms, a question popped out of him almost automatically. I wanted to ask, Haruto said. Has there ever been a series in Fleeting Blossoms that got adapted into a manga, an anime, or a game? There has, Yukino replied after a brief pause. But the odds are low. It's the kind of thing that happens once in a long while. If you want a realistic path toward those kinds of adaptations, you usually need to serialize in Crimson Maple itself, our flagship magazine. That is where the biggest influence gathers. It made sense. A work's impact depended on both its quality and the platform carrying it. Yukino continued, her voice easing slightly, as if she was giving him a glimpse of the real ladder in this industry. However, Print volumes are common. If your popularity does not fall too low and readers respond well, the publisher will generally arrange a tankban release. A lot of series sell several tens of thousands of copies, and some break over 100,000. She pointed lightly at a line in the contract. Your royalty rate is 7%. If your volume sales go well, that income will likely be 1 or 2 times your manuscript fees from the serialization period. A series did not pay in a single stream. Manuscript fees were one stream. Royalties were another. Merchandise could become a third. The total could become frighteningly large once everything stacked together. And that kind of ecosystem only existed because Japan's pop culture industry was mature, and because the audience was generally willing to pay for official releases, treating creative work as something with real value. If the culture was one where everyone hunted pirated rips and free downloads as a default, creators would make nowhere near this kind of money. I understand, Haruto said after thinking it over. Then he did not hesitate. He picked up the pen and signed. Most publishing contracts were similar no matter which company you went with. There was no space for dramatic bargaining at his level. If you wanted to eat in this world, you had to respect the market's rules first. Yukino watched him sign, and a small smile finally appeared at the edge of her lips. She stood and extended her hand across the desk. Congratulations! From this moment on, you are officially a contracted author under Crimson Maple Literature. Chapter 12, A Pen Name, a Deadline, and the story finally connects. Oh, one more thing, Yukino said after seeing Haruto sign the contract. When your novel starts serializing in the magazine, do you want to use your real name or a pen name for the author credit? Does it make a difference? Haruto asked. Of course it does, Yukino replied seriously. If you use your real name, Haruto, most readers will immediately assume the author is male just from the name alone, and that can create problems. After all, over 70% of Fleeting Blossoms readers are women. A lot of them, whether they admit it or not, will subconsciously assume that a shoujo romance written by a man must be low quality. Haruto immediately understood her point. In the merged memories from that parallel world, the situation was exactly the same. Male authors writing palace intrigue aimed at women, or female authors writing male harem stories, were often questioned right away if they lacked prior achievements. Readers would instinctively doubt whether the author could truly handle a genre meant for the opposite gender. He thought about it for a few seconds. This was not a big issue at all, and if Yukino was bringing it up, then the solution was obvious. In that case, Haruto said calmly, let's not use my real name. Use my pen name instead. Put the author credit as Shiori Takahashi. His reasoning was simple. Shiori Takahashi, whose soul memories had fused with his own, like leaving behind a faint trace of her existence in this world. Shiori Takahashi. Yukino repeated softly, thinking it over. Not bad. At first glance, it leans feminine, but when you think about it, a male author using this name is not strange either. If you become famous in the future, readers will not accuse Crimson Maple Literature of tricking them together with you. Let's settle it like that. She then leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxed, though her expression turned serious again. Since the signing went smoothly, there's one more thing I need to warn you about. According to the schedule, the first chapter of Blue Spring Ride will be published on a Wednesday, 2 weeks from now. So listen carefully. Yukino's body language looked casual, but her eyes were sharp. Serialization is only the first step. After that, every issue will track reader popularity. If your ranking stays at the bottom for too long. She paused deliberately. The publisher will cut the series. Do you know why Fleeting Blossoms suddenly had empty slots? The truth is that 2 novels that had been serializing in this magazine for over a month stayed dead last in popularity and were both cancelled. The light novel industry is ruthless. The room fell silent for a few seconds. I understand, Haruto said solemnly, then stood and left the office. That night, he tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Before signing, his attitude had been simple. Let the novel serialize first, and figure things out later. But now that the contract was signed, the weight of serialization crashed down on him all at once. It was not that the manuscript fee felt heavy. It was that, for the first time as a student, after interacting with working adults, he finally understood what responsibility meant. He had known Yukino for barely a week, and their total conversation time probably did not exceed 3 hours. Yet she had gone out of her way inside Crimson Maple Literature, arguing for him, pushing his proposal forward, and securing him a serialization slot. The readers of the magazine were faceless to him. He could not see them. Whether they loved Blue Spring Ride, hated it, felt surprised, or felt nothing at all, he could not feel it directly. As someone who was technically an adapter rather than the original creator, he had no real emotional connection to those reactions. But Yukino was different. She was real. He had met her, spoken to her, and seen her effort. After leaving the company that afternoon, anxiety about how to write the latter half of Blue Spring Ride, and how to deliver the manuscript on time, flooded his mind. He absolutely did not want the novel to start serializing, only for him to miss deadlines, cause delays, or produce a rushed ending that would force Yukino to take the blame inside the company for supporting him. I need to do something about this. These memory fragments cannot keep jumping randomly like this. A person's lifetime of memories is too long. If they keep jumping at random, when will I ever reach the latter half of Blue Spring Ride? With those thoughts weighing on him, Haruto finally drifted into sleep around 2 in the morning. And almost instantly, it happened. That familiar sensation of being pulled into Shiori's memories surged over him again. This time, however, the jump was precise. Accurate. It landed squarely at a crucial point. The exact moment where Blue Spring Ride Episode 6 had once cut off. Haruto's heart skipped a beat. He immediately focused. In those memory fragments, Shiori had resumed watching this arc after several days. The room was dim, snacks neatly prepared, everything familiar. If he gets off the train, I'll keep liking him. If he doesn't, I'll give up. Futaba's inner monologue echoed in the anime. Because Shiori's emotional experience was partially shared with him, Haruto could feel the same flutter and tension she felt when watching this scene for the first time. And it was not just her feelings. He himself was drawn in completely. A girl's way of thinking was truly mysterious. She had agreed to ride the train home together, but after realizing that her close friend also liked cow, she became hopelessly tangled inside. Unable to reach a conclusion, she came up with this absurd test. She claimed she had something to do. She got off the train. Then she decided the fate of her feelings on whether cow would follow her off, abandoning the last train home without knowing why. Maybe this was exactly why men struggled to write good shoujo romance. How could a normal guy ever guess what the heroine was thinking at that moment? If he doesn't get off, I'll give up. If he does, I'll keep liking him. The repeated inner monologue, paired with the quietly swelling background music, pushed Futaba's anxiety and confusion to the edge. The dusk-lit station. The boy and girl staring at each other through the train doors. And then the doors began to close. Get off. Futaba closed her eyes and lowered her head, screaming the words silently in her heart. That fleeting, desperate thought betrayed what she truly wanted. The wind stirred as the train departed, lifting her hair. At the peak of the music, Futaba lifted her head. Bathed in orange sunset light, the boy's silhouette stood before her. Kao was there, calm, handsome, and looking straight at her with quiet sincerity. He had not chosen the easy path of riding home alone. Without knowing anything at all, he had stepped off the train at the very last second, choosing to stay by Futaba's side. Did you forget something? The boy asked gently. I'll go with you. There was no impatience in his voice. That scene left Shiori stunned. Her heart overflowed with emotion, a lump rising in her throat, tears threatening to fall. And Haruto, immersed in her memory, was stunned as well. Because he realized something important. Setting aside Shiori's emotional influence entirely, even from his own perspective alone, he was deeply moved by this scene. Someone who had never watched show romance before was now touched by Blue Spring Ride. So this was it. When a romance story was truly good, even boys could awaken a fragile, fluttering heart inside themselves. In the past, he never understood why some men could watch palace intrigue dramas with such enthusiasm, and he thought they were strange. Now, he finally understood a little. A good story does not belong to any gender. Chapter 13, A rival appears and the urge to win. I really am a liar. What should I do now? Acting like I am hesitating, even though I had already decided from the start. At times like this, I know it. Kao will definitely get off the train. There had never truly been a choice. Futaba knew it. Kao would get off the train. From the very beginning, she had never intended to give him up. The ending of episode 6, delayed by an entire week back then, now unfolded clearly before Haruto's eyes. So this is a girl's inner world. Haruto murmured, still immersed in the youthful emotions of the story. It really is complicated. At the same time, he felt completely lost. If this was how girls thought, then he suspected that no matter how long he lived, he would never fully understand their hearts. The next morning, Haruto woke up early with dark circles under his eyes. He had fallen asleep at 2 in the morning. Even though following memories in his dreams counted as rest in some sense, 5 hours of sleep was still far from enough, and his mind felt sluggish. However, he had started to grasp a pattern in Shiori's memories. It could not be a coincidence that the night he was unable to sleep because of Blue Spring Ride, he just happened to see that exact segment of her memories. So what determined which memories she showed me? Is it related to my subconscious? If I am under pressure and desperately want to know a certain period of her memories, does the probability of seeing those memories increase when I fall asleep? Pressure came from deadline chasing. Because he knew that if he could not quickly grasp the entire storyline of Blue Spring Ride, then in just a few weeks, he would be facing a very real serialization crisis. More importantly, he did not want to disappoint Yukino, the editor who trusted him. She believed that a mere high school student like him would not stall, would not collapse midway, and would not abandon his work, which was why she fought for his serialization slot. At the very least, his first novel could not become a bad example. Thankfully, the night before, he had watched the entire anime adaptation of Blue Spring Ride in one go. After tidying himself up, putting on his school uniform, and slinging his bag over one shoulder, Haruto opened the door and headed to school. Haruto is actually a pretty decent guy, Kaito said cautiously. Even though his family used to be well off, he never looked down on poorer students, and he got along with everyone. Oh right, at the end of last semester, he chased after Rin, for quite a while. They were really close for a time, but after this semester started, they completely stopped talking. I guess he hit a wall. Chasing Rin and dating her. Reina replied coolly. That sounds pretty irresponsible. Forget it, that is not what I am asking about. Kaito, what I want to know is not this kind of surface-level stuff. I want information that is less known and more personal. Reina stood in a quiet corner of the school, wearing the black and white school uniform skirt. Her figure was tall and slender, her appearance refined and elegant, long hair flowing down her back as she held her school bag with both hands. She was speaking with Kaito, her former middle school classmate, about Haruto. Less known. More personal. Kaito's expression turned strange. No way. Did Reina really have such terrible taste? After thinking for a moment, he asked, what kind of personal information are you talking about? Anything, Reina Fujimoto replied. Anything. Kaito lowered his head and thought hard. Finally, something came to mind. Well, last semester, a classmate of mine mentioned during a chat that Haruto once said his ideal type was women with big chests. The mature, Oni-san type. He barely got halfway through before he noticed Reina staring at him as if he were a criminal, and he immediately shut his mouth. Hey, you said anything was fine. Why that look? Trying to ease the awkwardness, Kaito quickly changed the subject. According to some unreliable rumors, Haruto's father passed away unexpectedly during winter break, and his dad's small company left behind a huge debt, which bankrupted their family. I do not know if you are interested in that. The rumor had spread among the girls after the opening ceremony yesterday. Kaito did not know if it was true, but he said it anyway. Bankrupt? His father passed away. Reina had not expected something so heavy. She fell silent for a moment, then spoke directly. What I want to know is this. Does Haruto have any hobbies? Like basketball, soccer, or writing novels? Probably not, Kaito said after thinking. None. None. Reina asked again. None, he confirmed. No one has ever seen or heard about him having hobbies like writing novels. Writing novels? Kaito laughed. Why would that be his hobby? You must be misunderstanding something. That is like gambling. If you succeed, you win big. If you do not, you cannot even afford food. It is just like filmmaking. Movie stars look glamorous, but who remembers the extras? Haruto is too smart to gamble his life on something like that. I have never heard of him doing that. An awkward silence settled between them. I see. Thank you, Kaito, Reina said, smiling. The smile was polite and forced, but it was enough to make Kaito's heart flutter. For most boys, there was always a goddess during their school years. Back in middle school, and even now at high school, over 80% of the male students regarded Reina as that goddess. Even knowing he likely had no chance, Kaido still felt happy just being a little closer to her. Reina, he asked curiously, why are you so concerned about Haruto? It is nothing, she replied calmly. A friend of mine is paying attention to him and asked me to look into it. I knew you were his classmate, so I came to ask. A friend is paying attention to him. Kaido's lips twitched slightly. Yes. And I would appreciate it if you kept this confidential. Please do not tell Haruto that someone is asking about him, Reina said seriously. Do not worry, Kaido said with a grin. You know me. I am famous for keeping my mouth shut. I will never mention this to him. Thank you, Reina said softly. After exchanging a few more polite words, they parted ways. Reina headed toward her classroom with her bag. She knew her behavior probably seemed strange to Kaido, but she understood herself very clearly. She and Haruto had gone to Crimson Maple Literature on the same day. They had submitted to the same editor, Yukino. Both Blue Spring Ride and yesterday's Starlight had passed the serialization meeting. Both would begin serialization in Fleeting Blossoms 2 Wednesdays from now. Most importantly, she had hidden all of this from her family, friends, school, and teachers. She was happy, but she was also lonely. No one around her would understand why a top student like her would waste time writing light novels and submitting them. But that was how hobbies worked. Under these circumstances, discovering that there was someone else at her school just like her made everything feel different. Same age. Same school. Both rookie light novel authors. Serialized in the same magazine under the same editor. All of it together triggered something deep inside her. From childhood to now, she had never lost to any classmates in exams or academics. If being assigned light novel author under Yukino, serializing in Fleeting Blossoms, was treated as another subject, another exam, then the serialization performance and influence of a work were its scores. And in that exam, Haruto was her only rival. She could accept yesterday's Starlight failing to dominate all other works in the same magazine. After all, those veteran authors had more life experience and creative experience than her. Just like a high school student losing to a PhD candidate, it was disappointing but understandable. But Haruto was different. Because his starting conditions in the light novel world were exactly the same as hers. Losing to him was something she could not accept. Yesterday's Starlight cannot lose to Blue Spring Ride in Fleeting Blossoms, she thought. Know your enemy, know yourself, and you will never lose. I cannot cut off contact with Kaido either. She clenched her small fist slightly. This unreasonable, sudden competitiveness surged within her without warning. Meanwhile, Haruto, yawning as he entered the classroom, had no idea that he had somehow become a rival in the eyes of a certain girl. The moment he stepped inside, he noticed the class's notorious loudmouth, Kaido, whispering suspiciously among a group of boys. They kept casting strange looks at him. Haruto felt confused. What is wrong with them? Did Kaido find out that Rin dumped me during winter break and is spreading gossip now? That big-mouthed guy. The thought annoyed him, but after a moment, he let it go. Let them talk. He and Rin were already broken up. Why care about that kind of thing? Chapter 14, Rumors at School and the Countdown to Release. A new semester meant a new beginning. In pretty much every class that day, the teachers spent the first 30 minutes chatting before they even got to the lesson. They said the usual things. You were already in your second year of high school, so it was time to rein yourself in. If your grades were bad, do not lose heart. Every year there were students who turned things around in their third year and went from dead last to getting into a good university. On that level, Japan was not all that different from the world Haruto remembered from those other memories. The only difference was that students here were not as obedient as the stereotypes claimed. Not everyone wanted to become some elite shining adult. Plenty of kids decided as early as high school that they would be fine growing up to be ordinary, and those students naturally did not grind themselves to dust. In Haruto's class, the teacher was practically preaching until his throat went dry, but most students were unmoved. Some even whispered among themselves, passing notes under the desk. Hey, did you hear? Haruto's family supposedly went bankrupt. Yeah, I heard too. Apparently his dad owed too much money, panicked, and something happened. Now everything they owned is going to paying off debts. Seriously? That is brutal. Life really can flip overnight. It is real, though. One of my middle school friends said their family was one of the creditors. Haruto used to be one of the better off kids in our class. Even if he suddenly takes the teacher's advice and fixes his grades, how is he supposed to afford university after the entrance exams next year? So that is why Rin has been so cold to him this semester. Last term they used to walk and talk together all the time, and now they act like strangers. That explains it. Forget that. The real bomb was what Kaito was telling the guys earlier. Hey? What did Kaito say? You know Reina Fujimoto, right? Kaito said she might be interested in Haruto. The physics teacher walked toward the back of the classroom and calmly snatched a note from a student's hand. He focused on it for a second, then his expression darkened. His mouth twitched. I have been talking for this long and it is like lecturing a brick wall, he said flatly. Kaito, stop spreading gossip all day. You two boys might not care, but if it spills into other classes, it becomes a problem. Next period I am giving you a problem on electromagnetism. If you have time to pass notes, then you must have completely mastered the material. Haruto and Kaito both froze. Why are they suddenly dragged into this? What on earth did that note even say? Haruto was completely confused. But before the morning classes were even over, he found out. Half the class was whispering. Apparently, Reina Fujimoto from class 7 had been quietly asking around about Haruto and paying close attention to him. Reina, the girl who had been top of the grade for as long as anyone could remember, the campus goddess that countless boys secretly worshipped, was paying attention to him? Yeah, right. It was not even about low self-esteem. Haruto simply knew he had no connection to her at all. He barely had to think before deciding it was nonsense. Rumors like this were everywhere in school. Somebody was dating somebody, somebody was secretly in love with somebody, and people acted as if they had cracked the code of the universe. Most of it was pure imagination. Teenagers loved to build fantasies out of nothing. Sometimes all it took was a girl from another class standing by the door and peeking inside, and suddenly half the room was writing a romance novel in their heads. If you took it seriously, you lost. Still, Rin, who sat one row ahead of him, turned around and glanced at him when she heard the rumor. She did not really believe it either. Even so, it left an unpleasant feeling in her chest. Who was Reina Fujimoto? Her father was a well-known business owner in the region. She was rich, beautiful, brilliant, and talented. It was not just academics. She was athletic too. In her first year, she entered competitions and won top-level awards, including national prizes for both painting and piano. A girl like that would be interested in a boy who had gone bankrupt, and who had been dumped by herself. Impossible. Just putting their names side by side felt like a joke because of the contrast. Rin took a slow breath and forced her gaze away from Haruto's side profile as he stared out the window at the drifting clouds. As for Kaito, the class's loudest mouth, he could not produce any proof when people questioned him. All he could do was declare with absolute confidence, "Time will prove everything. I might love gossip, but I do not spread lies." The rumor about Haruto and Reina sparked a brief wave of chatter, then faded quickly. Nobody truly believed it. It was just something fun to talk about, and by the next day, the heat was gone. Haruto's new semester routine was painfully simple. Wake up. Go to school. Eat. Go home. Write. Little by little, the manuscript for Blue Spring Ride became more complete. As for Crimson Maple literature, he had assumed all he needed to do was submit chapters on schedule and that would be the end of it. But on Wednesday evening, Yukino called him to headquarters. "The reason I asked you to come is simple," she said. "The publisher has lined up an illustrator to design the promotional poster for your first serialized installment. The character designs and overall style need input from you as the author. For a magazine at the level of Fleeting Blossoms, when a new series launched, the publisher almost always included a full-color illustrated poster tucked inside that issue. The issue of Fleeting Blossoms that would feature Chapter 1 of Blue Spring Ride was scheduled for region-wide release 2 Wednesdays from now, on February 22. The printing work was already underway at the press. If the poster was going to make it into the issue, it had to be finished within the week, which meant they could not wait until the weekend. So for the next 2 evenings, Haruto did not get any rest after school. Instead, he met with the professional illustrator arranged by Crimson Maple Literature, discussing the poster's atmosphere, the character designs, and how to capture the feel of the story. To be honest, his mental image of the characters came almost entirely from the original anime. When he talked with the illustrator, he kept guiding the designs toward that familiar look. After all, the characters were part of why the original work had become a hit. He trusted the tastes of otaku culture, even if it came from another world. As for the next chapters of the novel, since he had no time to write in the evenings, he started doing it during the day while classes were in session. The teachers did not pay much attention to him anyway because his grades were not great, and his seat was in the very back by the window. It was the perfect spot to write quietly without anyone bothering him. 2 weeks passed in the blink of an eye. At last, the date arrived. February 21st. The temperature rose that day. Spring was creeping in, and a warm breeze drifted through the air, the kind that made people sleepy and lazy. But among the students at Minami Shiro Third High School, there were 2 people who felt like this perfectly ordinary Tuesday was moving painfully slowly. Because tomorrow was release day. Tomorrow, Blue Spring Ride and yesterday's Starlight would finally hit shelves. Chapter 15, first issue on sale and 2 new series begin. In the prefecture, there was no shortage of light novel magazines with real influence on the market. However, aside from a handful of nationally famous publications, the magazines most familiar to local readers still belonged to the 5 major light novel publishing houses. The people who bought these magazines ranged from office workers and students to teachers and freelancers, spanning nearly every age group and profession. No one thought it was strange or embarrassing to see someone in their 20s or 30s standing on a train platform or sitting on the subway, completely absorbed in a youth romance magazine. That was simply the atmosphere of society. In Japan, otaku culture had long been accepted into everyday life. There was no need to look at people who loved anime and light novels through tinted glasses. As noon approached, more and more people gathered outside bookstores, newsstands, and magazine shops to buy the latest releases. The 5 major light novel publishers were competitors, but not the kind who blindly tried to crush each other. Their flagship magazines deliberately staggered release dates. For example, Crimson Maple Literature's main magazine, Crimson Maple, came out on Wednesdays and Sundays, while Blue Sky Press's top-selling magazine, Blue Sky, released on Tuesdays and Saturdays. The other major publishers followed similar schedules with their own flagship titles. If everyone released on the same day, readers would be overwhelmed with choices, sales would cannibalize each other, and everyone would lose. No publisher was foolish enough to invite that outcome. As for Fleeting Blossoms, it was a true weekly magazine like Crimson Maple, and its release days happened to fall on the same days as Crimson Maple. Over the years, Crimson Maple Literature had cultivated a loyal fanbase. For most of them, Crimson Maple was their first pick. Still, a significant number of readers chose to buy both Crimson Maple and Fleeting Blossoms together, since they were released on the same day. The prices were reasonable too. Crimson Maple sold for 500 yen per copy, while Fleeting Blossoms was priced at 400 yen. Nina was one of those readers. Her family lived near the center of city, and she had grown up reading magazines published by Crimson Maple Literature. Even now that she was an adult, the habit had never changed. Let's see, Nina muttered to herself. There's a new serialization in Crimson Maple this issue. Hey! After returning home, she set Crimson Maple aside and turned her attention to Fleeting Blossoms instead. That was her usual reading order. She always started with the magazine she was slightly less invested in, saving her favorite for last. That way, every series she read built anticipation for the next, instead of leaving her bored after finishing the one she cared about most. She tore open the plastic wrapping on Fleeting Blossoms and immediately felt something different. There was clearly something extra inside. The magazine felt thicker than usual. And the cover illustration was different too. There were 2 unfamiliar illustrated characters on the front. When she opened the first page, 2 folded posters slipped out. Nina unfolded them on the table. The first illustration showed a boy and a girl holding hands beneath a star-filled sky, their heads tilted upward as they gazed into the cosmos. At the top, bold letters read "Yesterday's Starlight." The second poster depicted autumn leaves swirling through the air as a boy and a girl stood facing each other, locked in a quiet, intense gaze. Both illustrations were well done. Posters like these mainly served to give readers a rough visual impression of the main characters. Blue Spring Ride. Nina murmured. This issue has 2 new series starting. Curious, she settled back onto the sofa and flipped through the pages. As always, she decided to start with the new serializations. The first one she read was Yesterday's Starlight, written by the author using the pen name Eri. Before she realized it, she was already drawn in. Judging from the poster, Nina had expected yesterday's Starlight to be a straightforward high school romance. But less than 2,000 words in, she realized how wrong she was. The story opened with a long-standing urban legend circulating through the school, followed by the heroine, Miyu Shinomiya, rescuing an injured black cat on campus. The male lead was, the Black Cat? A fantasy romance set in a school environment? That was surprisingly rare. As she continued reading, Nina became more and more absorbed. After accidentally triggering the curse tied to the school's urban legend, the Black Cat began appearing in Miyu's dreams. Together, they wandered through a dreamlike version of the school, searching for a way to save her fate. Within the dream, the Black Cat transformed into a boy, and as the journey continued, the bond between him and Miyu slowly deepened. The first half of the chapter focused heavily on world building and setting explanations, which made the pacing feel a little slow. But once the story shifted into its main plot in the latter half, the tense and mysterious fantasy romance swept Nina right into its world. She finished the entire chapter in about 10 minutes. When she reached the final page of yesterday's Starlight's first installment, a powerful urge to keep reading welled up inside her. "It's way too short," she complained, slumping back against the sofa. "It stops right at the best part. Which one of the three Miyus in the dream is real? How does the Black Cat boy tell them apart? Ending it here is torture." Her expression turned sour. She had assumed it would be just another average new series in Fleeting Blossoms. She had not expected the story to hook her this hard. A magazine serialized many novels at once, and most of them inevitably felt mediocre to any given reader. Everyone had different tastes, after all. She did not know how other readers felt, but for her, yesterday's Starlight was exactly her kind of story. "Looks like I'm following another series now," Nina said with a stretch. "Please do not let it fall apart later." Without lingering too long, she flipped through the table of contents and turned to the next new serialization. Blue Spring Ride by Shiori Takahashi. I once had a season of time that could never fade. It was the summer of middle school, after classes ended, when a sudden rainstorm fell. The opening lines were written from the perspective of the heroine, Futaba, capturing her inner monologue from her middle school days. Sheltering from the rain beneath the eaves, she ran into a classmate who was also hiding from the downpour. Two awkward teenagers. Futaba accepting a towel from the boy to dry her hair. Stealing glances at his face through the curtain of rain. Her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it. Blurting out, "I hate all boys," out of embarrassment and fear that her feelings for him would be noticed. And then realizing that the boy she liked, Cow, had heard her words. It was a simple opening, yet in just a few hundred words, Nina was completely drawn in. Seeing the story through Futaba's eyes, she felt the sting of tsundere pride ruining everything. The careless words that hurt someone she cared about. The boy transferring schools the very next day. Futaba wanting to apologize, yet never getting the chance. With concise, gentle prose, the story established its emotional hook and pulled Nina's curiosity tight. She leaned forward slightly, already eager to read more.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.